Welcome to another exciting episode of Submission Radio. It's January 19th. I'm Dennis Skradov. I'm here with Kasper Rosalowski. We've got a legend-packed show today, and I think that's pretty much an understatement, isn't it, Cass?
Yeah, we're like the KFC double legend combo, the ultimate box. You get your choice of Pat Miletich, the UFC Hall of Famer. He will be on the show today. And we've got another legend. Now, get ready for this one. This is one you're probably not going to expect, right? This guy's done a lot. He's not the most well known for his mixed martial arts. In fact, I don't think too many people know him for his mixed martial arts, but he's a legend. He's none other than Bill Goldberg. He's a man who, for those of you who don't know, an absolute legend in the pro wrestling business. His gimmick was somewhat, I wouldn't say he was an MMA fighter, but basically when he got into the business, he loved MMA. MMA wasn't exactly a viable option, and he basically he trained with Frank Shamrock. He was involved in Elite XC, in Strikeforce. The guy has done a lot. Dennis, what are some other things that they can expect from Bill Goldberg if they don't know who he is?
Well, Big Bill, he was around Japan, wrestling around the period where Pride was huge. So he really knows a lot of the stuff that was going on around there. Like he said, influenced by a lot of the MMA guys, and just an icon. Fought guys like Hulk Hogan in pro wrestling matches. Was a star in WCW. Has his own gym, Muay Thai gym. Is very close with a lot of the guys in MMA. So very interested to see what he has to say. Of course, we'll be asking Goldberg a couple of questions about his legendary pro wrestling career, but we'll also be talking to him about a lot of other subjects the fans are going to want to listen to, such as John Jones, Brock Lesnar, who's a good friend of his, whether or not we'll see him wrestling or whether or not we'll even see him fighting MMA or Muay Thai in the future. The guy trains like 3 times a day or something like that, or
three times a week.
Well, there you go, even better. So, he definitely does train. So we'll definitely have a chat to him about that. Who knows? Maybe Goldberg could be coming to Bellator next. There's only one way to find out. You have to listen to our interview. He's not saying he's going to Bellator. We're also not saying that he's going to Bellator, but he'll listen to the interview.
He's not going to Bellator.
He's not going to Bellator. Yeah.
But in all honesty, look, we caught up with Goldberg. It was a few days ago, so this one was a pre-recorded interview. It's an interesting one. We had a couple of audio malfunctions. We actually had to speak to Dennis over his phone. Nonetheless, very, very interesting very, very interesting interview. Not what you'd expect at all from a pro wrestling guy. Very, very knowledgeable on the sport of mixed martial arts and a huge, huge fan.
Yeah, that's right, Cass. But before we jump to our first guest, just a bit of housekeeping in order. First of all, the Twitter page, Submission Radio Twitter. Now, you and me and the Submission Radio team, we have a lot of fun through this thing. There's a lot of fun photos, opinions, stuff that's going on with the show, old school interviews, and everything in between. That's, guys, if you get an opportunity, please follow us at Submission AUS. We love talking with the fans. We love tweeting back and forth, giving our opinion to people. So if you want a good follow and someone that you can talk to at any time of the night, because remember, if you're in the US, it's technically daytime here in Australia. So you might have a stressful night and it might be 3 a.m. there. No one wants to talk to you. Tweet Submission Radio. We'll have something to give you. And then also the Facebook page and, of course, the YouTube page, youtube.com/Submission Radio AU. Check that out. Lots of fun interviews. One with Don Fry, one with TJ Dillashaw. There's a fun interview there with Ken Shamrock and a whole lot of other guys. Make sure you check that out. Bas Rutten is on there. He's come on our show for the 3rd time. He had a lot of really interesting things to say. So make sure you check it out. But like you said, Cass, I think it's time for our first guest.
All right, guys, our next guest is a former UFC welterweight champion. He's a UFC welterweight tournament champion, a UFC Hall of Famer, and he has trained fighters and champions such as Matt Hughes, Tim Sylvia, Jens Pulver, and, of course, Robbie Lawler. He is the legend, none other than Pat Miletich, and today's on Submission Radio. Pat, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm doing great, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Pat, it's a brand new year. How was 2014 and how was 2015 so far treating a Hall of Famer like yourself?
Well, 2014 was a good year. I mean, I was very busy, doing broadcasts. We did quite a few broadcasts last year, and a lot of law enforcement and military trainings. I've done that for about 15 years, had my own company doing that, and starting a lot of different ventures. And 2015's probably shaping up to be a heck of a lot busier, actually. We've got, I think, 44 shows scheduled for 2015, already 25 law enforcement and military training seminars scheduled, and opening some businesses. And so running around with my head cut off, so to speak.
Well, Pat, you're like the Donald Trump of MMA. Now, we want to go back to the start of your career for a second. A lot of people get into fighting for different reasons, whether it's money, fame, competitive nature. We read that you first got into fighting professionally to help pay for your mom's medical bills. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was going to school, going to college, and was, obviously wanting to get a degree and move on with my life. I was competing in wrestling. Still, it was something that football was really my first love, but I ended up going to school and wrestling, actually. So my mother got sick with heart problems and could no longer work. And so since my brothers were all older, had families, moved away, some of them, there was really nobody around to take care of her and help her. And so I decided to quit school and go home, and started working 3 jobs, and just was not satisfied with how my life was shaping up to become, and I still had a lot of competitiveness in my blood, and figured that I would at least give it a shot, and started fighting kickboxing and boxing matches. And then that kind of evolved into, once I saw the first Ultimate Fighting Championship come on TV, I said, wow, this is actually my sport. It's tailor-made for me. And since I had a wrestling background and had already had a head start on a lot of people in terms of trying to become a well-balanced fighter or athlete, in terms of already having grappling experience and the boxing and kickboxing, I thought it was perfect for me. So it luckily worked out well for me, and my mother's actually still alive. She's 80 years old, and so things have worked out pretty well overall.
Awesome. Now we want to talk about obviously your gym and the Miletich Fighting System. It was another thing that you were famous for. When you first put together and started the Miletich Fighting System, what was your mantra and what was your way of being different from all the other gyms that existed at the time?
I don't know. I had, I think, a unique insight into understanding that, number one, I wasn't a world-class wrestler. I was a good wrestler, but I wasn't a world-class wrestler. So I knew I wasn't good enough in that area to win fights based on that alone. And seeing how many other things were out there, having trained in martial arts, the submission games, and the great strikers, whether it be boxing or Muay Thai, I realized pretty quick that I needed to be, good at everything, not great at anything, but good at everything, to be able to find a weakness in somebody. And that, along with, I think, the wrestling mentality of the extreme levels of conditioning that it takes to wrestle, and take that to another level with even the striking and everything else, that one way or another I was going to be able to beat people. But on top of that, I think I snapped my forearm in my first kickboxing match and had to finish the fight with a broken arm. I did it in the first round, lost a decision, and because I had snapped my arm, I got a little bit panicky and got tired during the fight. So I never wanted to lose again because I was tired, no matter what happened. So I had to make my training very extreme. And then I also had a kid that I did not know him, but I was a special guest when I was fighting in the UFC, special guest at the kickboxing event in Chicago, and the kid actually died. His heart literally blew up. But I had climbed in the ring because I knew the kid was in trouble right away when he collapsed. And myself and some volunteer firemen were working on him for 8 minutes before a paramedic. They didn't even have an ambulance there. And
Wow.
by the time the ambulance got there, the kid was dark blue and had already died. He died, while we were working on him, trying to save him. And so I never wanted to, as a coach, have to talk or face somebody's parents, that something horrible had happened to an athlete that I was supposed to be training. Never wanted anything like that to happen. So we set out to make champions, but also make sure that the people that didn't belong in the ring or the cage never got in it. And there was an article that just came out not too long ago, actually, and I said to them, a lot of people thought that I was really not a good person, the way I ran practices and the way fighters who came from out of town to train with us, you know, that couldn't handle the training, left after a day or two. They couldn't deal with it, and that was fine with me, because I didn't want those type of people around that didn't belong, and that was my motivation for making sure that, you know, that never happened in the ring, or the cage. So that was kind of the way we did things.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Pat, you know, because obviously a lot of people know the gym for having amazing sparring sessions and, you know, like you mentioned, a lot of intense training. Just wondering, you know, it was a room full of champions. You know, Casper mentioned some of the guys in the camp. You know, what was it like when it came time to spar and it was, for example, 5:30? What was the atmosphere like in the room, and what was it like, you know, to see these guys who really were the best of the time, you know, going at it, you know, every day sparring? What was that situation like?
Well, it was, you know, I would say it was very similar to my days wrestling. You know, my teammates on the wrestling team, my teammates on the wrestling team were, you know, some of my absolute best friends in life. But when we were in the wrestling ring training with each other, we had no problem, you know, pounding each other into the mat. And if you had a bad day or you didn't keep up the pace, you really got it put on you. And it was the same way on sparring night or any other night, really, in our gym. You know, and I always woke up for well over a decade on Wednesday mornings with a huge smile on my face, because it was sparring night. I absolutely loved getting after it and sparring hard, and I think most of the other guys really, really loved it also. Some people said that they dreaded Wednesdays, but I, on the other hand, relished the thought of going at it for 12 or 15 rounds, and you know, just there's nothing better than being young, healthy, and in shape, and going at it like that. It's a blast.
Yeah, we read a lot of stories from a lot of the guys, you know, like Tim Sylvia and I want to say Jens Pulver, and they're talking about how I think sparring was like around 5 or 5:30, and from about 3 o'clock, you know, your heart was pumping, and they'd be watching the clock and things like that. I wanted to ask you, you know, a lot of guys that we speak to, everyone, and just you see it on the countdowns and everything like that, they always talk about training and training smart and less is more and this and that. You know, I'm just wondering, with that whole less is more approach, you know, can you tell us your views on training and sparring, and if those same methods that you use to make those champions, if they still remain applicable in today's training?
Yeah, I mean, nothing replaces hard work. I don't care what anybody says. Now, obviously, it was my job to get fighters to their events healthy, and I think I had a pretty solid record when it came to that, getting guys to fights healthy. And so that you know, the train smart and less is more, in my mind, is garbage, because, you know, you don't become a Formula One race car driver by getting in a sedan and driving down the highway at 65 miles an hour. You know, those guys have to go through, you know, a lot and work their way up to that level, driving hard and driving fast. And that's the same for fighting. You don't get fight reaction. You don't get endurance to that level unless you train at that level. So the practices, the training had to be more intense and harder than any fight ever could be. So, you know, in my mind, that's the way it had to be. Now, our sparring was not with MMA gloves. You know, it was with 16-ounce gloves, headgear, shin pads, you know, all geared up and protected so that we could go hard. Did people still get knocked out now and then? Yes. But, you know, most of the time guys remained healthy. They were exhausted at the end of the training, but you know, we got people to fights healthy. So, AKA does a great job with King Velasquez and all the other guys that they've got over there, the Daniel Cormiers and everything. They train that way over there, I know. And that's why they have so many good guys, is because they train that way. And so, you know, it's just, to me, in my mind, the people that are going to be successful are the ones that work harder than everybody else.
Very well said, Pat. Now, you know, let's get back to your career. You know, from a young age, you always wanted to be a champion. You mentioned before you didn't want to be ordinary. And, you know, in 1998, when you defeated Mikey Burnett to become the first ever UFC welterweight champion, you know, what was it like becoming the champion? And, you know, how did you feel when you realized, you know, you fulfilled a dream like that, you know, as becoming a UFC champion?
You know, actually, I think winning the 4-man tournament was, in my mind, becoming the champion. So the Brazil fight was more, even though they gave the belt at that point, it was still, in my mind, defense of the title, because Mikey had dropped out of the tournament after his first fight. So it definitely was, the realization of a dream, a goal, and I thought that by winning that title that, everything was going to be peaches and cream after that. But, once you win the title, then you have to defend it. And suddenly, the bullseye that you had on everybody else, like when I was coming up boxing and had to fight a guy for a United States championship, everybody had the bullseye on his back, and I was the hungry one coming up. So once you have the belt, now the bullseye's around, on your back, and every fighter on the planet at your weight is wanting to beat you. They're training specifically to beat you. So that's, a whole new level of pressure comes about, and responsibility also, because a lot of eyes are on you.
It's interesting that you say that, Pat, because we wanted to touch on that. You mentioned how the Brazil win was sort of bigger, winning the welterweight tournament. Oleg Taktarov, another MMA legend and a UFC tournament winner, recently mentioned how he believes the real Ultimate Fighting Championship died in the 90s because back then there were fewer rules, you had no rounds, the weight differences were much bigger, and guys had to fight obviously multiple times in one night. And Oleg also mentioned that nowadays one fight is just a fight. As a former UFC tournament winner yourself, what are your thoughts on these comments, and do you think there's any truth to those statements?
I think to a certain extent there is some truth to that, because fighting in tournaments, I had fought in 3 tournaments before I started, doing single fights only. But the tournament aspect of things is, I tell you what, man, it's a blast, but a ton of pressure. You're watching the guys fight on the other side of the bracket and figuring out how you're going to beat them while you're getting ready for a fight, and fighting 3 fights in one night for 2 of my tournaments against guys that were much bigger. There's a lot of strategy involved in that. So, and also, do you go out and try and conserve energy and stay healthy and just win? Or because, back then in the first 2 tournaments I fought in, there were no weight divisions, no time limits, none of that. So, and I was smaller than everybody else. So I said to myself, I've got to go out and try and, dispatch of these guys as quickly as I can so that I'm fresh for the next round. And it worked out that way. I was able to beat guys pretty quickly. And the other guys were having wars on the other side of the bracket, 20 and 30-minute fights, and it helped me considerably.
Now, when you were champion in the UFC, it was very much a growing period for the sport, Pat. In fact, the sport is still growing now, but, with the Fox deal and the Reebok deal and in general, the sport is blowing up. What do you think about the sport and where it's headed? And did you ever think that it would get as big as it is now?
I knew it would. I knew it was going to explode eventually once the people out there, the public, were educated as to what, level of dedication, of endurance, and technical knowledge goes into becoming an athlete in the sport. So I knew it was headed to big things, but I wasn't sure exactly when it was going to happen. In terms of where the sport's headed right now, with this UFC lawsuit that's come about, I think that could change the sport's complexion in a big way. By changing the contracts so that athletes truly are, if you're an independent contractor, well, you're going to go to the highest bidder. And so the contracts in MMA are pretty restrictive, and you don't see those type of contracts in any other sport. They just do not exist. They get laughed out of any other professional sports negotiating. They just wouldn't be accepted. So that's going to change the complexion of the sport, and I think that you're going to see a lot more people with a lot of money get involved in the sport because of that, if this lawsuit, ends up, doing something with the contracts.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we wanted to get your thoughts on, Pat. I'm just wondering, if you're going to get involved in the lawsuit in some capacity, and also just, for all the listeners out there, and to be honest, ourselves as well, just in layman terms, sort of explain what exactly is it about, and just in general, you mentioned before about, how the contracts would be laughed out of any sport. What exactly is it about the contracts that you think just shouldn't apply to MMA?
Well, it's in terms of the contracts, it's a situation where, one organization having a great deal of power and making you sign a contract that includes signing away your likeness and the rights to that likeness for as long as the company wants to use it. Things like that. The champions clause, where if I have a belt underneath an organization, I can't walk and look for, at the end of my contract, if I'm a champion, there's always another fight that I have to fulfill, no matter what. And there's a few other things in the contract that, I haven't looked at one of them for a long time, but I'm assuming for the most part that they're similar to that. And a lot of the guys that have complained about it of late, who are still athletes, will concur with some of those things. So that's, the restrictive nature of the contracts are pretty tough to deal with, I think, for the athletes. And also on top of that, not being able to get the sponsors that you want, unless those sponsors pay a fee to the promoter or the promotion before they can sponsor athletes, and it goes on down the line. So it makes it tough for the athletes. It's you have to figure, if I'm getting whatever it is now, 8,000 to show up in any organization, my medicals cost quite a bit of money to go through. I have to pay my manager. I have to pay my trainers. I have to pay taxes. So by the time I get done getting paid, I actually might be in the hole a little bit. So it's pretty tough. And on top of that, now with restricting, sponsors, very tough for the guys trying to come up and break into the upper ranks.
Now, Pat, Randy Couture was on the show last week, and we were talking about this lawsuit situation. And one of the things we sort of spoke about is, and I'd love your opinion on it, is do you think that this lawsuit could be sort of the embryonic stage of a MMA fighters union coming together, now that fighters are sort of seeing other fighters, stand up for certain issues like contracts and other things happening in the sport? And if an MMA union does happen, is that something that you would welcome to the sport?
I think a union is very tough to pull off because of the independent contractor status of the athletes. It's not like they are members of a team that pays them as they do in baseball and football and things like that. So it's very difficult to do that. What are the union fees going to be? And when guys are only fighting, 4 times a year, 3 times a year, some 2 times a year, how do you work that out? What are the benefits of it? I'm not necessarily a guy that would support a fighters union. If the contracts are adjusted to be more fair to the athletes and give them more power in their future and their direction of their career, I think that's sufficient. I mean, I'm a guy that is a big believer in the free market system, and the guys that perform the best get paid the most and put butts in seats. That's really what it comes down to. So, not necessarily a guy that supports a fighters union, and on top of that, it'd be very tough to pull off.
All right, well, let's talk about, one of the more famous fighters and products of the Miletich system, Robbie Lawler. He recently became the UFC Welterweight champion. It was rather crazy to see Robbie not only have such a big career resurgence over the last few years, but win the big one on the biggest stage. As a coach, what do you think the main reason is for Robbie being able to stay relevant and so good after so many years in MMA?
I think that, the main thing is Robbie, when he trains very hard, and he's got a good work ethic. He's an exceptional athlete. He's very smart. He's very observant. He watches the sport. He watches boxing. He watches kickboxing, and he studies things. He's generally a pretty quiet guy, but he's always thinking, and that's something. But the fact that he, having been at 185 pounds for quite a while after his first UFC stint. And it's not like anybody at 185 pounds just came out and ran him over. And you got to remember, those guys are cutting down from 230 pounds, some of them. He was fighting guys that were naturally much bigger than him and beating some of them. And nobody, like I said, any of the world-class guys were just coming out and running him over. So I knew, and, myself and several other people were in his ear for all those years saying, you need to drop back down to 170. That's where you belong, and go in and make a run and win a world title and take care of yourself and your family. And, once he made that decision to drop down to 170 and got signed by the UFC, I pretty much knew that he was going to wreak havoc on that division. A lot of people laughed at me publicly in the media, on Twitter, on Facebook. Lawler's going to get killed by Josh Koscheck. He's going to get destroyed by this guy, by that guy. And, he went in and did his work and now finally has that belt. So I'm really happy for him.
Now, Pat, there seems to be a lot of mystique about Robbie in the gym because, there are times where he didn't spar for a while. Also, we heard, and this is a rumor, that he was a little bit defined back in the day. Can you tell us, what was it like training with a practically, he was very, very young, a very, very young version of Robbie Lawler back in the day at the Miletich Fighting System?
He wasn't defiant really at all. On the other hand, he was a guy that depending on who the person was, and for the most part, you never really wanted to just come out and say, this is what you're going to do. If simply asked, which I've done several times, what do you think you need to work on? Robbie would tell me what he thought he needed to work on, and he was pretty much always on target with that, and that's the stuff we would work on. To give you an example, one time when he was sparring, Tim Sylvia was standing off to the side watching him spar, and Rob didn't have his hands up high. And Tim Sylvia said, "Robbie, get your hands up." And so Rob looked over at Tim, dropped his hands down to his side, and finished the round like that for a minute, and basically let Tim know what he thought of his advice. And Tim said it again a couple of rounds later, and he did it again, and I just said, "Tim, shut up. leave him alone. He knows what he's doing." And so that's just kind of the way Rob was.
Yeah, and you mentioned before when Robbie was obviously fighting middleweight in Strikeforce, and people laughing when the Josh Koscheck got announced. You've obviously been close for a number of years. In all honesty, going back around 2011 when Robbie had those few tough losses in Strikeforce, did you ever envision him becoming a champion in the UFC?
Yeah, and I wanted that really bad too. It's a guy that started training with me when he was 16 years old or so. So he was a guy that I really liked having around, and he was a guy that was liked by everybody on the team. Everybody saw him like a little brother, back in those days. And so, no, I knew he could. If he dropped to 170, I knew he could beat anybody on the planet. And I think, at the time, George St. Pierre was the champion, and I told people, and a lot of people laughed at me about that, but I said, Robbie Lawler is the worst possible matchup for George St. Pierre. Robbie will absolutely wreck him. And now obviously we didn't get to find out about that matchup because George has stepped away for a while, or maybe for good, we don't know. But Robbie's a bad matchup for almost anybody because of his skill set and how dangerous he is and how hard he hits.
I'd love to hear, Pat, when you say he's the worst possible matchup for GSP, just from a coach's standpoint, are you able to elaborate a little bit more on that and, why you think he would be such a bad matchup for GSP?
George, was a guy that is very good at the transition game, very good at making people think they're in a boxing match and hitting takedowns when people least expect it. Very good at holding people down. Very good at controlling people, and pretty dang good with his jab and setting stuff up off of that jab. But Robbie's a much more refined striker than George is. He hits much harder, and George certainly would not be able to hold Rob down and ride out a decision. It just wouldn't happen. So that's given those two things. It would not be a good matchup for George, period.
Very interesting, Pat. Now, we read a quote of yours recently, which was, "I made it a point to always tell people if you truly care about your training partners and your teammates, you will kick their ass." Can you explain your philosophy to us? And also, what do you think when you hear about the fighters like Rory McDonald versus GSP and Tyron Woodley versus Hector Lombard not being made because of being teammates and not wanting to fight each other? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the training room, it's my job to make my training partners better by putting it on them. And I went through the days where I got my butt handed to me in the room, and it made me better. Made me better because I got motivated. I was motivated. I trained harder because of it, because I did not want to have people get over on me in the training room, which then translates into wins in actual fights. You know, it doesn't go to the level of being malicious when you put it on somebody. If you hurt someone in a training session, you know, with a good kick or a good punch or something, you're not going to try and then knock them completely unconscious. You're going to back off. But up until that point, I'm going to put it on someone as hard as I possibly can. That's just the way it is, and that's the way it's always been for me and for any of the guys that always trained with me. And they had no problem. I mean, the first time that I ever got dropped in my gym was Jeremy Horn hit me with a body shot and dropped me. And he ran around the room. The whole room stopped. All my fighters stopped. And they were all high-fiving Jeremy because he, you know, somebody dropped me. And, you know, and I laid there, I had the wind knocked out of me and got up laughing and said, you know, hey, great shot, you know, let's go back after because I'm going to try and do the same thing back at you, you know. So that's the way it should be.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, Pat, you know, we mentioned Tim Sylvia a bit throughout the interview. You know, he's one of your more famous students, and he recently retired. You know, it's a bit of a shame because I believe it was commission-related also. You know, do you think it was the right time for Tim to retire, or do you think he had given enough to the sport, or do you think he had more to do in MMA?
You know, I think that, you know, things happen for a reason. You know, an MRI came back that showed some abnormalities in his brain, and that's never a good thing. And obviously his weight had ballooned up quite a bit. He's 370 pounds, which he obviously should not be at that weight. He should be walking around, you know, no more than 300 pounds, and even less in my mind, for him to remain healthy throughout life, probably, you know. But, you know, the injuries that a guy sustains over all the years, and the bigger guys are more susceptible, you know, to the lower back problems, the hips, the knees, the feet, you know, all those sort of things. And so it gets, as you get older, it gets harder and harder to work the weight off, and especially when you're beat up, banged up, your lower extremities, you can't you can't go out and do road work. You can't do the things that you used to do to burn the calories. And so, you know, once you get to that point, obviously it's probably a good idea to hang it up.
Now, Pat, we're going to ask you a couple of fan questions. When fans knew you were coming into the show, they sent through some questions, so we picked out a couple to ask you. And, you know, the first one comes from MMA Shooters. You know, he wants to know what's your thought about this whole John Jones situation and recreational drugs in MMA in general. Do you think that they affect performance, and do you think that they could become an issue in the sport?
I was very surprised that he tested positive for cocaine. I mean, you know, cocaine is such a destructive drug and such a nasty addiction that people can get into. I've not seen it amongst a lot of athletes, and certainly not guys that are good at MMA. It's such a bad drug that I'm shocked that someone who's that good an athlete and able to perform at that level is doing it. I don't know how much he did it, but you know, that's number one. Number two, you know, who are John Jones's handlers that allowing him to hang out with people that are giving him cocaine at whether it's parties or wherever the hell he's at in the first place. And so that's another thing that, you know, people who are around him that realize there's a problem need to say, listen, you need to maybe look into getting, you know, different representation, hanging out with a different group of people, and you know, that's something that has to come about. And so you never want to be surrounded by a bunch of yes men. And I think I was lucky in that aspect, where the friends that I had that I hung out with, if I ever did anything that was going to be a mistake and detrimental to my life, they had no problem calling me out on it. And you know, that's a true friend, somebody that's going to get in your face and say, listen, you might be the world champ, but you're screwing up your life right now, and you need to wake up. And that's important. So I think that some of those people out there that are around John need to evaluate, you know, what people in that group need to go. And so that's probably the first thing.
Now I got another fan question from B Head. He wants to know, He wants to know, after the Robbie Lawler fight, there was an iconic shot of you, Matt Hughes, the former welterweight champion, then the legend, and the Robbie Lawler and the old Miletich crew celebrating. What was it like for you to be a part of that moment and also having another one of your guys hold the belt after the Robbie Lawler fight?
It was nice. It was nice. I understood the significance of it, right away. To kind of let you know, give you a little bit of background on that, when Rob was training with us for probably a couple of years, by the time he was, 18 years old, I mean, he was in sparring, he was beating the hell out of world champions at 18 already. And in the room, he was a different guy. In fights at that age, he would go out with reckless abandon, but in the room, he would absolutely pick you apart, and was very composed in the room. And one day after training session, grappling session, Matt Hughes had really kicked my butt one day, and I at that time had the UFC title, and I sat down on a bench in the locker room, and Matt sat down on another bench, and then there was another bench behind Matt that Robbie was sitting on. And Matt said, "Hey, old man, you better stay on your toes, because I'm breathing right down your neck, and I'm coming for you." And it was a way of saying, your time's about up, and I'm going to be the next champ. And I understood it as that. But what Matt didn't realize is who was sitting behind him. And I said, "Yeah, well, while I'm looking over my shoulder at you, you might want to look over your shoulder." And he turned around and saw Rob sitting there, and Matt turned back toward me and started laughing. He goes, "All right, I know exactly what you're saying." So,
Wow. And it would be, imagine just someone being in that room, a photographer, and getting a photo at that stage. That would have just been an amazing picture. Now, we have another question here from Zombie Lawler. That's a really interesting username. He'd like to know, you and Carlos Newton were supposed to coach the Ultimate Fighter 3 originally instead of Ken and Tito. Now, how close were you to doing tough, and what exactly happened to stop that from happening?
well, I was on a movie set down in Mexico, a Paul Walker film, actually. And the director, John Hirschfeld, who's a really good friend of mine, got a phone call and said, "Pat, I got somebody on a cell phone here that wants to talk to you." So I walked over to him. We're in the desert in Baja, Mexico, and walked over and took the phone from him. It was Dana White, and he said, "Hey, I'm just wondering if you'd say yes if I made you and Carlos Newton coaches of the next Ultimate Fighter." I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to." And he goes, "Okay." And Matt Hughes was fighting, I believe, that night. And so the whole crew from the movie, a bunch of the actors, Lawrence Fishburne, Paul Walker, the Carradine brothers, John Hirschfeld, the director, myself, and some of the other fighters, Rob Lawler was one of them, Rory Markham, Tim Sylvia, Chuck Liddell, Dan McGee, a bunch of us went over to a golf resort, and they hooked up the pay-per-view for us so we could watch Matt Hughes fight Joe Riggs. And we were missing that fight, and so we at least wanted to be able to see him fight. And Dana White climbed in the cage during that show and said, grabbed the microphone and said, "I want to announce the fighters for the next season of The Ultimate Fighter." And I said, "Wow, he's going to announce it. Okay, cool." And he announced Ken Shamrock and Tito Ortiz, and everybody in the room turned around and looked at me with disbelief, going, "Wow, you just got shafted hard." And it's pretty bad. I got blindsided pretty bad on that one. Dana has since apologized for that, and everything's good with us. I don't have a problem with it. But at the time, it was not a pleasant experience. I can tell you, because definitely a surprise.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. And the last fan question is from Duckshot3. Now, we feel like we could maybe guess this one, but you never know. There's so many killers in the gym. He wants to know, who was the hardest hitter back in the day that you trained?
The two hardest punchers I ever trained were Rob Lawler and a guy by the name of Drew McFedry. Many people will remember him from the UFC days. And he beat Alessio Sakara and some other guys. Drew was probably the best athlete that I ever had, but he had a rough road with Crohn's disease, and did not absorb the nutrients from his food into his body, and really ran into a lot of problems because of that, with endurance and a lot of other stuff. And it was too bad, because he just a scary guy when it came to striking. Just would dismantle people. And 16-ounce gloves and headgear did not help you with Drew McFedries. He would put you to sleep either way.
Wow.
So yeah, it was kind of a bummer him getting sidelined with the Crohn's disease and everything else that he had gone through. He had a pretty tough road.
Now, Pat, what we're going to do now is a fun little thing we like to finish our interviews with called the Submission Radio Tap Out Round. We throw some really fun questions at you, and you answer with the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Now, what did it feel like when you got inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame?
Wow, the first thing that comes to mind, surprised.
What's your favorite technique that you've always taught your guys?
Footwork.
You're a great coach yourself. But what's the best advice you've ever received from a coach?
Don't pay attention to keeping your office neat. Your focus should be on your athletes.
Pat, if you could go back in time on the condition that you could only either be a coach or be a fighter, which one would you choose?
I'd be a fighter.
Now, July is a while away in 2015, but who do you think should be the next inductee into the UFC Hall of Fame, in your opinion?
Boss Rutan.
Oh, Bass is awesome. Now, you spent a lot of time there. Do you miss Strikeforce?
I do miss Strikeforce. I loved Strikeforce.
Finish the sentence for us, Pat. People don't know that I
love the golf.
Now, Pat, if you could train anyone today in the sport that you haven't yet trained, who would it be?
Tyron Woodley.
And finally, Pat, what do you want people to remember most when they think about Pat Miletich 100 years down the track?
Ew, boy, that's a rough one. Love the fans. How's that?
Loving the fans. Hey, can't argue with that. Pat, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today. Guys, don't forget to check out Pat Miletich on Twitter at Pat Miletich. And, of course, the website firehorsecombatives.com. Obviously, Pat does a lot of training with the military and I believe police officers and things like that. Pat, it's been such a pleasure having you on your show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And hopefully someday Australia is one of the few places on the planet I've never been. So I'd love to make it there someday.
This is Diego Sanchez, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest is a special treat. He's a multiple world heavyweight champion of pro wrestling. He's an expert in MMA. He's even got his own gym. Right now on the line, we have none other than Bill Goldberg himself. Goldberg, welcome to Submission Radio.
You know what? I'm very happy to be here.
Well, it's a huge honor for us, especially given how many years we've been watching you. Tell us, it's a brand new year, 2015. We're wondering, what does a multiple-time world champion get up to for New Year's?
Oh, Jesus. I got an 8-year-old son. So, we just hung out. He waited, or he stayed up as late as humanly possible. We launched a rocket right before he went to bed, and then probably my wife and I fell asleep at probably 11 p.m. I mean, that's the MO of a 48-year-old father with an 8-year-old son who's done just about everything in the world in past New Year's time. So,
Wow, yeah. I'd imagine some of those New Year's in Japan would have been pretty crazy going. Bill, let's go back in time a little bit. For fans who don't know, let's go back a little bit in time to before your pro wrestling days. You had a very good career in football. You were very good in college. You played NFL. Let the fans know that don't really know your story. What kind of motivated you to get into the sport of pro wrestling and, have a go at it?
Mine's a totally different story from the norm. I wasn't the kid that grew up and idolized professional wrestling because what filled that void for me was the fact that I had two older brothers who played college football, major college football, and I wanted to do nothing but follow in their footsteps. That was a dream of mine since, the first time I can remember, and so that was my goal. Obviously, to make it to major college football and then make it into the NFL. I'll fast forward. I was able to be lucky enough to have had a pretty good college career and make a couple of years in the NFL. Unfortunately, I got injured, had to retire. And then in all honesty, I had no direction. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. My dream was crushed. I had no aspiration to go out and earn a living doing anything other than what I loved, and that was taken away from me. And unfortunately, I had to figure out what the hell was going on in my life. And I did a number of things, none of which were groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination career-wise. And, I would, being a professional football player in Atlanta, Georgia, and not being married, the nightlife in Georgia is quite extensive, especially Atlanta. And so I would frequent a number of establishments that were frequented by a lot of the professional wrestlers. And I had introductions. Big guys usually cross paths, and they're interested about the other guys, so they're inquisitive, and so they ask questions. And I was playing football at the time, and they were wrestling, and they kind of tried to the soft recruiting pitch to me. And in all honesty, I mean, that's something that I never envisioned myself doing. And in retrospect, I mean, to me, it was an embarrassment because I was a professional athlete, and why did I want to, strip down to my underwear and act like I'm beating someone up as opposed to truly doing it? Well, truly doing it wasn't an option because mixed martial arts had just taken off at that point, and there was absolutely no money in it. And so, my options were kind of running out, in that I didn't have a desire to try anything else. And I said, what the hell? This UFC mixed martial arts is just coming onto the scene, and I truly believed that it was going to be the biggest thing going. I thought it was cool as hell. And if I thought my thought process was that if I liked to watch it, then I would think a lot of other people would like to watch it. And so I assumed a character that I could look myself in the mirror and be proud of. It wasn't a far departure by any stretch of imagination from my true self. And so, therefore, I didn't have to act as much as the normal person. And, I was lucky enough to find something that fit. I approached WCW. Well, they approached me a number of times, and then I actually called Jim Ross, and I had a meeting with Vince McMahon. I did not like that meeting with Vince McMahon. The next day, I called Eric Bischoff, and I said, listen, I'm going to make a decision here, and, the World Wrestling Federation has a contract on the table for me, and that's not where I want to be. So push came to shove. I told him that, hey, I'm not going to – I remember the quote like it was yesterday. I'm not going to be one of those $500 a week throw around the ring dudes. I'm going to come in and make a difference. And to have known that to have foreseen the difference that I actually made was, unbelievable. I never would have done that. But it was something that I applied all of my past tendencies, my ability to work longer than somebody else, my ability to put a lot of thought process into what I was doing and try to make it, appealing to everybody else. And I'm anal retentive. I do things to perfection. So I put a lot of time and a lot of effort, and a lot of people helped me mold this, not necessarily mold the character, because the character was my idea, but they helped me flourish as a character. I mean, they taught me everything. I had no concept of professional wrestling whatsoever. And, the next thing you know, people are starting to chant my name, and the rest is history. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because everybody obviously knows the story, your huge streak in WCW and you being an icon. I'm very curious because it sounds like not really that you were close to going to the WWF, but, there's that what if. What was the meeting like, and what did they offer you? Did they just want you to be a jobber, or what was expected of you from the WWF?
No, it was the Vince McMahon persona that I didn't like at the time. I mean, it was overbearing. I didn't feel as though leaving Georgia and going where I really didn't know anybody, that they would have my best interest at heart. So I don't believe any of them have your best interest at heart. I believe it's a self-serving, business. But at the end of the day, the Steiner brothers, I was fairly close to them. DDP, I met a number of times, and Sting and Lex Luger and Bagwell, and so I saw those guys all the time. So I had a familiarity with them. And also, what turned me off was my first step into Vince's office. I realized that I hadn't I hadn't brought my agent with me, and I really didn't understand how the wrestling business went, and I didn't have any representation in that meeting, so I made the statement that, oh shit, pardon me. I said,
you can say whatever you want, Bill. Just letting you know.
I said, shit, man, I forgot my agent. The secretary looked at me, and she had this ghastly look on her face. She goes, oh, no, Vince McMahon doesn't like to deal with agents. And so, that's a negative for sure, because that's a guy who wants to take advantage of the talent.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had the business sense from playing football, and I knew better than to go in there and hand somebody my likeness. It wasn't going to happen.
Now, when you first began your run in WCW, the fans would obviously count your record. It was a pretty cool idea. You began at 1-0, 10-0, and then eventually, I think, around about 173 wins in a row. I'm just wondering, who came up with that whole idea behind that angle? Was it yourself, or was it Eric Bischoff? Who was that?
No, I can't take credit for it by any stretch of imagination. Firstly, it was I believe it was organic. It was something that took a life of its own. I think Tony Schiavone and Heenan and Mike Tenay had a lot to do with that. I think, it may have been Tenay, but I definitely won't be taking credit for that one.
Absolutely. And, during that time, it was the Monday Night War. The ratings for both shows were just absolutely insane. It was absolutely different to what it is now. What was it like being at the forefront of all that? What was it like being a part, of that huge wrestling boom and, really taking over the world, with pro wrestling?
It was awesome. I mean, I can't say that I can compare it against anything because that's all I knew. I was there at the pinnacle of the business. I also am not really qualified to give anybody an answer in that area because I never saw the bad times. I never had to wrestle, in front of 20 people and jump off a building for $25 just to get on TV. I'm not saying that in a pompous way. I'm saying that in a way that it actually happened. And I was extremely lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. A lot of things were in my favor, and the timing of the Monday Night Wars had everything to do with it. And, I think there were some people there at the time that I think the business has, like I said, a bunch of people who are self-serving and they like to step on others on their way up. But, I was always conscious about that and trying to be protective of my character. And, I learned from some of the best.
And when people look back on your career, it's a culmination of spears and jackhammers and lots of highlights. But, a really big moment in on itself was obviously your match with Hulk Hogan in Atlanta in front of 44,000 people. How did that come together? We heard rumors that Hogan put heat rub under one of his armpits and put you in a headlock. In a headlock. What was the whole night like for you?
Well, the deal is it's like this. I heard about the announcement watching it live on Thursday Night Thunder.
Wow.
J.J. Dillon announced it, and I was like, what? Okay. I guess, So, and as far as, Hogan and the Icy Hot, absolutely. That's one of those tricks that they do to rookies or young boys or whatever the hell you want to call them, to try to catch them off guard and see how they handle the pressure. Yeah, it didn't bother me. It pissed me off, but it didn't bother me. I mean, stuff like that didn't have to be done to me because I'd been there and done that in another, I'll never forget. I'm riding with Kevin Nash and, what's his name? One of the wrestlers, God, he had the flock, Raven.
Yeah.
Raven ride with us, and I go to sit in the front seat, and he goes, "Oh, hold on a second." He goes, "You got to pay your dues." And I turned around and I said, "Listen, bitch, I paid my dues by being on the football field and having 320-pound dudes trying to rip my head off every play." So if you don't want to consider that as paying my dues, then you and I are going to have to go down. So it was a different deal. I mean, I had to play their game and always know that, people were trying to get at me from behind. But, it is what it is.
Absolutely. And, just on the other side of that coin, around 2000, 2001, WCW was quickly going downhill. Bill, just wondering, what was it like being a part of the company near the end? Because there was that one booking decision, thing that really fans didn't understand that WCW did, which was trying to turn you heel, I believe, near the end there. What was it like being a part of that? I imagine it'd be kind of frustrating.
Well, I mean, yes and no. The reality is that if you're 100% bought into the world of professional wrestling, and you understand what's going on, then you get the fact that a heel turn would be a monumentous occasion if done properly. And, you know, between you and I and everybody who's listening to this, I would have much rather enjoyed working as a heel personally, but I didn't like what it would have done to my fans. My fans, you know, the night that they turned me heel, I had a Make-A-Wish girl in the back. She was a cancer. She was under chemotherapy at the time. And, you know, I had to go out and I had to beat up Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who just came back from cancer.
Mm.
And I come in the back and she's bawling and she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand. And it touched me, you know, and like I said, I think it showed that I may have lacked a little bit of company sense, but at the end of the day, if I ruined one kid's dream of me being their superhero, then that was one kid too many for me. So, I believe a part of the demise of WCW was the dipshit that we got from WWE, the writer,
Vince Russo.
Vince Russo. I mean, he was a moron, you know, through and through. He may have been successful at putting, you know, wrestling shows together in the past, but I believe he was a plant. You know, I think he was sent down to turn us, you know, to make us go downhill. And I thought his ideas were, you know, some of his ideas were asinine and ridiculous. And he and I didn't have, we didn't see eye to eye in anything whatsoever. And so I think he was a contributing factor to the demise of the company, along with the merger. And, you know, there was a lot of things. I mean, I was injured at the end. So, I mean, I watched the last episode from my television.
Wow. And it's excuse me. It's interesting to hear you say that about your fans. I believe I have read in the past that one of your biggest reasons for coming over to the WWE was because the fans wanted it. You know, and it was cool because we got to see you mix it up and have some dream matches, you know, and also spear the hell out of guys like Christian, a 3-minute warning. However, you know, it didn't feel like the WWE really used you the right way and sort of tried to force you to change your style. You know, what was that period like with the WWE for you?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Let's look at it right now. Let's look at it in real time. You know, wrestling moves are hollowed entities. You know, you don't take moves from other people. Now, when I was at the WWE and they wanted people to start spearing people, and they wanted me, they actually had the nerve to ask me to stop spearing people.
Wow.
And now you look at the company, and it's the setup move for, you know, I don't know, 40% of the guys, girls included, you know, part of the McMahon family, for God's sakes. So I don't believe that they took that from me or chose to use that because it was a great move. I think they wanted to water down my legacy. So looking at that from today's standpoint, and then looking back as to how they used me, with me being one of the guys that was kicking their ass in the Monday Night Wars, and being on the other side, and me telling Vince no in the beginning and going to the opposing team, and then, you know, when he buys them out, that, you know, I'm acquired. You know, it was just a totally different deal. I wasn't a product of Vince McMahon. And at the end of the day, they may be the best business entity in the wrestling business, but they're not the end all, because they because of their ego, they forewent a bunch of opportunities that we could have made a lot of money at. And let's be honest. I mean, I beat Brock Lesnar my last match, and if I had any desire to stay there whatsoever, if it was any type of a positive, I would have stayed, but it wasn't. So it's just it was a negative part of my life, and I just didn't enjoy being there.
And it's interesting that you touch on that Brock Lesnar match, because, you know, fans were so excited. You know, it was WrestleMania 20, and it all came together very, very well. Great build-up. But the match itself, I think it was a little bit of a strange situation. I believe around that time, Brock decided he was leaving the company, and it was sort of around when the match happened. How did you enjoy your WrestleMania 20 experience in the match itself with Brock? And obviously Stone Cold ran in at the end. Did you enjoy that match?
Oh, hell no. I was miserable. I'd try to repress it. You know, he and I both. The reality is it could have been one of the biggest matches in their history if done properly. But nobody cared. Nobody cared. And since they didn't care, I mean, when I looked across the ring at him, he didn't care. I didn't care. We just wanted to go. And that was a shame. They could have made a lot of money at it, but they didn't. So, you know, I feel really bad about it for the fans, but you know, they shit on it too. I mean, they could have not done what they did, and we probably would have had a much better match because we wouldn't have been as pissed off. I thought he was going to try to kill me, and I wanted to kill him at the same time, like for real, because we were so mad at what was going on. We just didn't have anything else to do but beat on each other. So, you know, we're good friends. I love Brock to death. You know, he's one of my best friends in the business, and he's let me rephrase that. He's one of my only friends in the business. And, you know, it was a shame. You had two absolute physical monsters with great characters going against each other, and it turned out to be a shitfest.
I always thought that the match that I think even though we didn't get to see, you know, the greatest Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar match, the match that we did kind of see that was similar was you versus Scott Steiner in WCW, which was another similar, you know, two monsters going at it. I want to also touch on Brock Lesnar. You know, there's a lot of rumors at the moment that he's going to the UFC and the WWE seem prepared for it. You know, what do you think about Brock going back to the UFC, and do you think he can have another successful run?
I think so. I think if Brock, you know, I haven't trained with Brock. I don't know exactly what he does, but, you know, if I were him, I'd spend 75% of my time on stand-up. You know, I believe that if he does it properly, he can go back and dominate. But if he doesn't do it properly, he'll go back, and the same thing will happen, you know, towards the end of his tenure. It's all about growing. It's all about being able to look yourself in the mirror and look at your deficiencies and be man enough and be egoless, you know, to go out and put yourself in negative situations in training so that you can learn. I do that 3 days a week right now. I'm sitting out front of my Muay Thai gym, my co-owned Muay Thai gym right now. I'm getting ready to go in and train, and I'm a perfectionist, and there are a lot of things that I can't do. And those are the things that I try to work on so that I'm well-rounded, so that there are no holes in my game. It's all about your ego. It's all about preparation. And let's be honest, he's healthy now. So you never know. I mean, I hope the best for him. I just want him to bring his ass down here and train with me a little bit.
You know, Bill, you mentioned how many times a week you train, and, you know, we imagine there'd be some great, you know, training sessions there at the gym. I believe it's called Extreme Power Gym. We hear some great things about it, by the way. You know, people say never when it comes to martial arts. We've had so many pro wrestlers and athletes go into martial arts like Brock Lesnar, Batista, Bobby Lashley, and CM Punk. And, you know, we know you have a lot of injuries, but would a fight be out of the question for yourself? Not even, you know, a UFC-level fight, but just a fight where you can sort of just have an amateur fight just to show off some of the training that you've been doing over the years in MMA?
Absolutely. That is in the back of my mind, and it has been for the past couple months. And, you know, hey, I'm 48 years old. The reality is that I have been, you know, it's not like I didn't retire from the NFL because of an injury. So my body is torn to shreds. But I continue to have the desire to compete. I talked to Hoist Gracie this morning. Same thing with him. You know, warriors never die. You know, they just get older and you know, things change a bit. But, you know, the spirit dies. Therefore, every day I look for some type of physical test. And, you know, whether it's putting myself against myself, which is my own worst critic and no question my biggest adversary, you know, if I can please myself, then I guarantee you I can go out there and have some fun with people. You know, Rampage and I were supposed to train earlier in the week. He unfortunately has the flu. We got a number of guys at the gym that like to trade punches. That's a lot of fun. And we got a big autograph session at the Magic City Comic-Con in Miami coming up this weekend. And did an interview yesterday with the Miami Statesman and put it out there that I want to train some Muay Thai. So, American Top Team threw an invitation out. A number of other people did. Hey, man, I don't have an ego. I've done more in my life than 90% of the people could ever imagine doing. And so I don't have an issue. Go on YouTube right now and look at the video that I posted of Jimmy Pedro, the Olympic judo coach, U.S. Olympic judo coach, tossing me around like a doll. Well, Jimmy weighs about 180 pounds. And if I had an ego and if I was worried about, what people think, I wouldn't put that online. But I thought it was great. And I thought it would be killer to be able to feel that from a professional, from one of the best in the world. I have no problem training with anybody and getting beaten by anybody, because anytime you get beat in an all, the good ones are the ones that prosper from that, and they learn and they get big, they get better, they grow in the knowledge department. I asked, it wasn't Brock, but one of the Muay Thai fighters, one of the events, years and years ago that I commentated. One of the fighters on the card, it was the Dynamite card that was at the LA Coliseum. One of the fighters, Melvin Manhoef. Okay,
oh, yeah.
Everybody in the MMA world knows Melvin. Mm. Well, Melvin goes out and he's pound for pound, one of the gnarliest Muay Thai practitioners, kickboxers. I don't even want to say kickboxers. Muay Thai fighters in the world. He goes out and he gets choked out in the first round. I think it was the first round, by a guy who'd never strike in his life. And at the end of the fight, when we went in the back after the event, I didn't know him from Adam, but I felt as though he had, he could do nothing but respect me, because I was coming from, an objective opinion. And I asked him, I said, pound for pound, who can beat you in the world on their feet? He goes, nobody. I said, well, why the fuck? Oh, here we go. Sorry. I said, why the hell why don't you train at least 50% of your regiment on the ground, so that you have a rudimentary idea of how to defend, how to take down, a number of submissions, so that you're prepared. This isn't glory. This is MMA, and there's a huge difference. So my idea is, if Brock takes a step back, looks at it from the outside in, assesses his ability and his deficiencies and properly attacks them, I think he's almost unstoppable. But, that remains to be seen. I don't know what he's going to do, and he's a good businessman, and the decision that he makes will be based upon the period and the story.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about Melvin, because he's actually had a few tough losses, especially recently at Bellator. He got knocked out by Schilling.
I was there.
Oh, you were there?
That was the only fight on the damn card that I wanted to see. That's the only reason why I went.
Wow.
I didn't go to see Tito. Are you kidding me? Those guys, that was ridiculous. Mm. I went to see Schilling and Manhoef because that's what I do now. I do Muay Thai, and those guys, totally different fighters, totally different styles, but I knew it was going to be a train wreck. And it was. So that's where the excitement lies for me now.
I like to think that, obviously, we do our research before we have our guests on. I like to think we're pretty well versed in terms of knowledge. I actually didn't realize that you did Muay Thai. That was a sort of big shock to me. I'm just wondering, how long ago did you start training Muay Thai? And in your opinion, I know you're probably not going to talk yourself up, but how good is Bill Goldberg?
No, I'm not worth a damn, not yet. But I don't know of many 270-pound guys that train Muay Thai 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So if you want to put me in my own, in the proper weight class, and how am I there? I don't know. We'll see this weekend when I go down, or next weekend when I go down to the American Top Team. I'm not very good, because I consider the biggest thing about martial arts that I love is the fact that there's nobody on the planet that knows everything. There's always something to learn. There's always room to grow. There's always a different technique. There's always a way to mold something into your own. And so, I'm on a personal quest of myself. Would I love to display my abilities? I don't know. I've thought about it, but who knows? That's not why I'm doing this. That's not what's driving me. What's driving me is a personal desire to challenge myself daily. And it's a lot of fun. I'm not very flexible. I've gained flexibility, pardon me, throughout the years. I've lost a lot of weight so that I'm much more efficient and much quicker in the ring. And my cardio is way up. I went, 7 rounds the other day, 7 rounds the other day. I don't know. Here in about 30 minutes, I'll probably do another 7. But,
wow.
I've been, right before I went to Japan to wrestle for Hustle One, I took it upon myself to start training Muay Thai. I, prior to that, owned, the largest MMA gym in the country for a little while back in Atlanta. And we had a couple of Muay Thai guys there, and I took a couple lessons from them, but I never took it seriously. When I came here to Southern California and I was preparing to go to Japan, I wanted to have as many tools as humanly possible just in case one of those guys wanted to be the first guy to knock Goldberg out. My second match was against the judo player, 6'5", Ogawa. Silver medalist in the Olympics for Japan in judo. And, this guy, he didn't have the best reputation, and I wanted to be ready for him. So I started taking private lessons then. I think I took them for, 6-8 months then, and then I'd take them sporadically over the next probably 5 to 10 years. And there was a movie that I was prepping for in August of last year. And it was a mixed martial arts movie. It never came through. But there were going to be a number of guys that I were going to have fight scenes with that were pro fighters. And I didn't want to have a drop off a bit by people viewing my skills next to them. So I started training 3 days a week, and I haven't stopped since August. I took 2 weeks off for Christmas, for holidays, and I'm continuing to train. And if I wasn't obsessed with it, I wouldn't even consider training while I'm on vacation down in Miami. But I want to learn from different people. I've got probably the best instructor I could ever have in the world here with me as my partner in the gym. It was his gym, it's his baby, Ruben Rawl, and he's 6-degree Black Tiger Muay Thai. I think he's one of the 2 Black Tiger instructors in the U.S. that have his credentials, and he's a go-to guy. And what better guy to learn from? And he's my partner. He's my very good friend. And we have a lot of fun. And we're both older, and we're both combat guys. He was 14 years in the military and ex-gunny in the Marines. And, he likes physicality just as much as the next guy.
Yeah.
But so he's a great guy to train from. My son trains there 3 days a week. And for me, it's other than, the weight room used to be my haven. But since I've hurt myself so many times, I can't do the things that I really like to do in the weight room when I'm in there. I can't lift the weight that I used to lift. But what I do lift is fairly substantial still. And once you combine that with proper technique in Muay Thai, that could be one hell of a dangerous, package, except for the fact that I'm 48 years old. But you know what? Age is nothing, man. Age is a number. So I'm going to continue to do what I do and have fun doing it.
Bill, I'm going to get a lot of heat if I don't ask you this question, because I know we have a lot of grappling and jiu-jitsu guys listening to our show every week. So I have to ask you this. What's Bill Goldberg like on the ground? How have you been training as hard in your jiu-jitsu and your wrestling and your judo as well, or is it just more of an interest in stand-up at the moment?
No, it's just stand-up. I haven't trained 1 second on any of the above disciplines that you've mentioned. If I looked at it as a business venture, then yeah, no doubt. If I was getting in an MMA competition, I'd be smart enough to spend ample time in each discipline. But the reality is, for the 15th time that I've said that little cliche, spending a lot of time on the ground isn't very conducive to all my injuries. I'd much rather strike on my feet and use my power, use my quickness, my agility, my athleticism as a 270-pound guy, and not ever have to go to the ground. You know, if I was to do an exhibition match, it would be Muay Thai. It wouldn't be MMA.
It's very interesting, especially considering your background. I think if fans heard about that tomorrow, I think they'd be very surprised. There's another guy who's coming into the MMA world, actually the UFC. You probably already know who I'm talking about. His base is more Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and of course I'm talking about CM Punk. I'm just wondering, what's your take on CM Punk deciding to fight in the UFC, and do you think he can be successful?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think anybody can be successful if they take the proper route and, you know, prior to stepping in that cage. I wanted to talk to Hoist a lot about CM, because I'm not going to pass judgment on anyone until I know 100% of their background, until I watch what they're doing. I want to see what his stand-up's like, you know. I think it was a great PR move for the UFC. It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of Pride fighting over the UFC, hands down, because of the entertainment factor. At the end of the day, what Pride, I think the biggest difference between Pride and the UFC is the pageantry of Pride, the over-the-top pageantry of it, the ability to watch kind of like the Street Fighter mentality of a very unique individual versus someone who's completely polar opposite of them. They still had matchups like the original UFC. Gracie and Akibono, Hongman Choi and
Fedor.
Who's the baseball player?
Jose Canseco.
Jose Canseco. You know, so as ridiculous as those fights are, and as unprepared and unqualified as some of these people are, it's huge entertainment. And if they're willing to go in and do it, then I'm willing to pay for it. And you know, I've been in the audience, and I was at the commentating booth at two of those events, and they're unbelievable. I had a great time there, and you know, the fans are wonderful, and it's the pageantry, and it's, I guess it all boils down to, at the end of the day, it's the fact that you're not watching two guys that are almost you know, very similar to each other. If you're in MMA these days, you'd be an absolute moron not to train equally in all disciplines. But for me, that makes everybody look the same. So I honestly, you know, don't enjoy it nearly as much as I used to. It doesn't hold a candle to it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Bill, because, you know...
But hold on. But at the same time, and I expressed this yesterday on the air somewhere, that doesn't mean that I don't respect and admire the ability of these new age fighters. Because you look at a John Jones, you look at a Miles Jury, you look at guys who are so well rounded. There's not one thing that stands out as their you know, their number one art. But that's the wave of the future. That's what people have to do. But what that does is it makes them like everybody else. So.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned Japan, because a lot of your fans here in Australia and our listeners around the world, they didn't really get a chance to watch you wrestle in Japan, but you were there for a while. You know, just wondering, what was your experience like wrestling in Japan? And, you know, we know that a lot of wrestlers went over and fought in Pride, you know, and sort of went back and forth. Did you, at any point in your time over in Japan, get an offer to fight in Pride, or, you know, in any of those K1 events, or anything like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, firstly, wrestling over in Japan was my goal. When I got into wrestling, I saw what Hogan was able to do over in Japan, and in all honesty, I like the style better because it's stiffer, and you know, they're not going to cry to their mommy if you hit them. You know, it makes it that much more believable. It makes it a much more entertaining event if you actually see stuff going on, as opposed to them insulting your intelligence and you miss a guy by 5 feet and he acts like you punched him in the face.
Yeah.
Excuse me. They like it stiff in Japan, and I love that, and that catered to my style. And so I very much enjoyed it over there. The fans were wonderful. Like I said, Hustle One was where I wrestled was owned by Pride. And did they want to entice me to fight? Absolutely. Was it something at the time where the money was there? Not comparatively for me. So if there's no question that I would have taken the mixed martial arts route if the money was there back in the day. But at the time that I got over to Japan, and I'd already sustained so many injuries, and I was getting older, and it just wasn't a smart move for me. So I try to look at things from a business sense, and I try not to, do anything that would ever demean or deteriorate my product, and not allow me to look myself in the mirror. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. Bill, we had Randy Couture on the show last week, and we were talking about CM Punk, and I guess this kind of applies to any other pro wrestlers and shoot fighters, but he mentioned how even though he may not have professional fighting experience, he obviously has a certain level of fitness from all his years in wrestling. Do you think there are any skills in pro wrestling that transcend into MMA?
I think the basic knowledge of body mechanics and the reality of submissions and a lot of guys over there have a little bit of a background, but they only have the amount of background that they need to pull the character off. There's no other reason to have more background in a martial art unless you use it. And I don't know. I mean, pro football players, in my opinion, are the best athletes in the world. So you look at a Matt Mitrione, you look at a Brandon Schwab, you look at, a number of guys who, and others have made the transition. And you're seeing that with a John Jones. I mean, John Jones is an example. He's got a brother, maybe one brother or two brothers that played in the NFL.
Mm.
And there's no reason John couldn't have done that if that's what he chose to do. But he grew up in a time when mixed martial arts was something that was appealing to him. Therefore, he forewent his opportunity to play one of the four traditional sports. And there's a guy right there that could have played probably any sport he wanted to, and he chose to pick MMA. And that's the difference. If the other sports weren't offered, the level of MMA fighting would go right through the roof. I mean, just be honest. I mean, look at some of these professional football players. Look at their ability. Look at J.J. Watt from the Houston Texans, a guy who's like 6'6", 295 pounds, who can do stuff physically that is absolutely ridiculous for any human being, let alone a guy that size.
Mm.
You don't have guys like that in MMA because they can make money elsewhere. But nowadays, you do because it's a viable option for them to make a financial windfall and succeed. So, it's just another option now. I mean, it's the fifth sport. And truthfully, one thing that I don't like about it is, I believe it's ruined a number of kids that were going to go to college but think that the MMA dream is out there, and they can put a shirt on from a gym and go in and train a couple times and think they're going to be the next freaking UFC heavyweight champion. It doesn't work like that. So it's professional wrestlers, definitely they have something to offer, but at the end of the day, wrestling's a tough deal. You're on the road a lot, you're hurt a lot, you have the ability to work around injuries, but a lot of the times if you're one of the main guys, it's dependent. The company's success is dependent upon your participation. So there's a lot of athletes out there, and I just think that a lot of them are going to MMA now. And are they the best athletes in the world? No, I don't believe so by any stretch of imagination. Look at rugby. It's some of those guys that have played rugby their entire life to pick up MMA when they're 15 years old, and think of how they'd be.
Mm.
Absolutely. They just naturally get all the takedowns. It's interesting that you mentioned, these kids going over, because it's true, they are going over and, their thoughts are, I'm going to go over to MMA and become an instant millionaire. when in reality, unfortunately, the way the landscape is, most of these guys are getting 10 and 10 to fight and are only fighting a few times a year, so they're not actually getting as huge of a salary, as these kids think. You're a smart guy. You talked about the fact that, you had your agent in the room for most discussions in your pro wrestling career. Do you think that MMA fighters are getting paid enough at the highest level in places like UFC?
No, not at all. But, it takes a while for it to grow. I believe, and I've said it before, that Vince McMahon is like a godfather to Dana White. Dana, whether he'll admit it or not, I believe, he's followed Vince's footsteps in a lot of dealings. It's ironic that, WCW went crumbling down, Vince monopolized the business pretty much, and then, boom, that's kind of what the UFC did. Strikeforce, Pride, acquired them all. And they're the big kid on the block, and, I truly believe that competition, increases the level of the product. Without it, it's stale. So, there you have it.
Now, Bill, before we do something fun with you called the Submission Radio Tap Out Round, we want to also bring up your podcast. We're fans, obviously, on Podcast One. You without, and there's a lot of good podcasts out there, but you without a doubt are a very talented interviewer and host. We've listened to another number of the episodes, and you've got the ability to sort of bring out the different side of guests, which appear across many of your episodes. What motivated you to get involved in the podcast world?
Still to this day, it's something I'm very uncomfortable with. I don't think I'm very good at it. I believe that, my show, it just absolutely pales in comparison compared to, like Austin's show, like Jim Ross's show, like Jericho's show, because I'm not a wrestling guy at heart. I'm a football guy at heart, and through my travels, I've met some wonderful people, and I met people from all walks of life. And to give people the ability to listen to me having a conversation with Hoist Gracie and me making fun of him, that's pretty funny. I think that's pretty damn entertaining. Me talking to Tony Stewart, who's one of the best NASCAR drivers in the history of the world, is my first guest, and me, he's my little brother, man. I rag on him as much as anybody. Couture, everybody, same thing. So I feel as though I can, I had Jim Kelly, who, Hall of Fame quarterback, going through, God knows what he's been through in 2014 with the cancer. And I follow that up. I got Tim Brown coming on next week, first wide receiver to ever win the Heisman Trophy. Well, if you ask me, and I'm not trying to be a dick, I think that's a much more interesting interview than listening to some professional wrestler that everyone else in the world has interviewed. So, going into it, it was just something for me to give. I try to give something, to people something different. Like I say, my podcast it pales in comparison to what those other guys do, because they cater to their current fan base. I try to cater to everybody. And like I said, I'm not a wrestling guy, and I don't say that in a malicious way, or I don't say it to be a jerk. But it is what it is. It doesn't interest me to the point where these guys, it interests them. Nor do I have the stories, because, coming from a professional football background, I've been there and done that. And so most of the time when I wrestled, I went and I did my job and I left. I don't have a lot of these on-the-road stories with all these guys for the past 20 years, and I was working in this territory, and the hell with that, man. I was kicking ass on the football field, rubbing shoulders with, guys like Eric Dickerson and Andre Reed, Andre Rison, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, Jim Elway, Deion Sanders, Herschel Walker. To me, that's reality. So I knew coming in that it wasn't going to be a hugely successful endeavor for me, but that's not why I got into it. I got into it to show people a different side of me and to share with them my experiences throughout my years of being Goldberg, not being the professional wrestler Goldberg, but by being Goldberg.
Absolutely. I think you're a bit hard on yourself. Your show is very, very good. We're pretty critical on these shows, so you should be very proud of yourself. And before we jump to the tap-out round, Bill, we are getting a lot of tweets right now from fans, and they sort of want to know, what are your thoughts on this whole John Jones situation? Obviously he's a fantastic fighter, but some big news came out earlier this week about, unfortunately, him having some issues with some illicit drugs. And, a guy like yourself who's been around the pro wrestling industry, which, had some cases of its own of guys struggling a little bit with, drugs themselves. What are your thoughts on this situation? And do you think John Jones comes back stronger from this experience?
I think, when I saw Dana White's comment about this is the best thing that could have happened, I was appalled. But once you sit back and think about it, for John Jones, the person, this is the best thing that could ever happen. Do I like John Jones as a fighter? Was I cheering for John Jones against Cormier? No. Do I appreciate his ability? Do I think he is pound for pound the gnarliest MMA fighter on the planet? Absolutely. Can I appreciate the fact that he's made it to that level by training his ass off and being unique and being innovative? Absolutely. Do I like him as a person on a post-fight interview? Absolutely not. Do I like the eye pokes and do I like the knee kicks? Absolutely not. I think that's cheap. I think he can get away with I think he can be a much better fighter and be a much better champion and be a much better example for people to follow if he sat back and just understood some of the things that he says and some of the things that he does need to be tweaked a little bit. And, hey, man, I don't know John, but I love him to death, man, because he's a guy that worked his ass off to make it to the top of his field. As a human being, I want the best for John Jones. UFC, on the other hand, what they did with this situation until I get 100% of all the information straight in front of me so I can look at it, I think, passing judgment, not really knowing everything, I think they dropped the ball because, they've been fighting for, 20 years to try to get a positive impression from everyone, from trying to get into New York State, from trying to get into these states that John McCain kept them out of years and years ago. I think it will be their best interest to do the right thing. And, the definition from the committee about in-season testing and what in-season means is absolutely appalling. It's ridiculous. And it's a technicality, and it's something that, if they would have pulled Jones from the fight, God knows how many millions of dollars they would have lost and had to refund. I can't tell you how long it's been that I have been wanting for a fight to happen, such as Cormier and John Jones. Lawler and Hendricks. I definitely wanted to see that one. But, there's other fights that you want to see. But, if they would have taken that one off the plate, then that was a huge loss for them in a lot of ways. So I understand from a business standpoint why nothing was done, but it doesn't look real good from the outside looking in. So I think something has to be done. I know John Jones is going to come back bigger and better. And, look at it from a wrestling standpoint. A lot of people thought he was a dick beforehand, though he was a great fighter. I made the analogy yesterday. It's like I'm a car guy. I love muscle cars, and if I see a lowrider going down the street and it's perfect, immaculate, I'm going to appreciate it, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. So I have a lot of respect for him, but I don't like some of the things that he says, and some of he's like a little baby sometimes, and that's not the way a champion is. And 90% of the time, he's a great champion. But there's just some things that I'm not in favor of. But, hey, it makes him look like a heel, and you need a heel. And, does it show a character turn? And, hey, could this be the thing that turns everybody, puts everybody back in his corner, and even the people that didn't like him before put in his corner? Hey, absolutely. But at the end of the day, none of that matters. We're talking about one human being and their struggle with drugs, and I hope nothing but the best for John Jones.
Bill, we really appreciate the time you're giving us. We're going to wrap this up in 2 seconds. Before we do, we're going to do what's called the submission rated tap-out round. It's kind of like word association. We ask you a bunch of fun questions, and you answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right, favorite part of the Ready to Rumble movie?
Oh, favorite part of the Ready to Rumble movie? Hanging out with David Arquette. He was really cool.
Give us the worst spear that you've ever seen done by another wrestler and the best one. And before you answer, we have to say we can't believe that we saw the Big Show was doing a spear these days.
You're kidding. Is he?
He was. Yeah.
Oh my God. Just pardon me for a second. I'm going to throw up. But in all honesty, I don't watch these guys. I don't watch wrestling. I don't watch these guys spear people. I can't do it. I just I can't answer that because I don't see other guys doing it.
That's fair enough. I think a lot of fans feel the same way. Bill, ever consider returning to MMA commentary?
I'd love to, man, but it's tough. It's tough. I mean, all you got to do is look back at my commentating of Brock and his first fight. I mean, I'm one of the most unprofessional commentators because I throw a lot of emotion into it because, hey, man, he's my buddy. And he wins his first fight, I go ballistic. Totally unprofessional. But, if I can't just sit and be myself and that's what is entailed, then I don't really want to do it. But would I enjoy it? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think it's going to happen? Who knows? But I would definitely welcome the opportunity because I'm much more knowledgeable, and I look at it a little differently.
Absolutely. Now, Bill, Don Fry, I believe, recently stayed with you at your house. What's a typical night out like for Goldberg and Don Fry?
I ain't telling you that. There's no way I'm telling you what Don Fry and Goldberg do when they're at my house. That's impossible. All I can say is there's a lot of beer drinking, a lot of spitting, and a lot of cussing going on.
That's all right. We had Don Fry a few weeks ago. When we have him back on the show, we'll ask him. We'll find out. Now, whose idea was it for you to punch the limo window on that episode of Thunder? Apparently, the cut was so bad that the amputation was discussed, and it took you out of action for 5 months.
Mine. It was a pure act of fit of rage. That's all it was. That's all it was. I got in a confrontation with Scott Hall earlier in the night, and I wanted to rip his head from his body, and I took it upon myself to do something absolutely ignorant and go on the fly and try to be Superman. And I unfortunately got hurt throughout the process, and it's all good. I only came within a centimeter of losing the use of my arm.
Jesus.
But it was the highest rated segment on public television or cable television.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's the best way to get the anger out. Now, we got to ask this, Bill, because fans would go ballistic if we didn't. Any chance at one last run in the WWE for Bill Goldberg?
Hey, if they want to do business and do it right, I'm more than willing to listen. If they want to continue to do what they've done with me in the past, I'd rather dig a ditch.
And finally, Bill, give us your favorite match from your career.
DDP's match and mine was great because, I mean, he's such a technician and he studies the game, and he brought it to me once it was tailored down. It was like on 14 pages of paper, for God's sakes. I think He had me spearing him 112 times. When I look back on it, my favorite matches were with, Rick Steiner was on my team most of the time, except for in Japan. I'd take him over there as my opponent. But working with Scotty was freaking awesome because he didn't cry. He's a bad dude. And I busted his orbital in the ring. And, look back on it and you can see when it happened and you see my reaction. And, God knows, it was the biggest slip up in the world. And I felt horrible right in the middle of the match. I go down to him on live TV and, I'm asking him if he's all right. But he's one tough SOB, and he's athletically gifted, stronger than hell, and he's got the persona. He's a badass. And I loved going in there and ranging with him, man. It was awesome because you knew you were going to feel it afterwards, but you knew you'd done something. And it was great. It was very believable.
Wow, awesome. Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you guys. Don't forget to follow Bill on Twitter @Goldberg. And, of course, check out Bill's show on Podcast One. It's called Who's Next? We highly recommend you listen to his interview with Don Fry. It's a lot of fun. And also, when's this Hoist Gracie episode dropping, Bill?
Let's see here. Next Tuesday, it will be Tim Brown from the Oakland Raiders. And then right after that will be Hoist Gracie.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely be sure to catch that one. Guys, you should definitely do the same. Again, Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, gentlemen. To all the fans out there, man, it was awesome to be in Australia when we were down there wrestling. That's one place that I definitely will always remember because the fans were just absolutely gracious. I remember staying 3 hours after a match I wasn't the champ, and we stayed in the ring and signed autographs for everybody, and it was just the least we could do. The fans were wonderful.
Hey, this is the Ultimate Fighter 17 winner, Kelvin Gastelum. You're listening to Submission Radio.
There you guys go, Bill Goldberg. What a great interview, Cass. You know, definitely a legend in his own right. And I know a lot of MMA fans might not know who he is, but, you know, he is an athlete through and through, and he's done a lot of great things as an athlete. So great to see, you know, some of his thoughts on the world of MMA. And, you know, the man was involved very heavily in MMA when he was in Japan, when he wrestled in Japan. He was, you know, involved with a lot of the companies and a lot of the fighters that fought in Pride. And, you know, also has his own Muay Thai gym, and he was involved in Strikeforce there, and he was a commentator for a while. So, yeah, the guy really does have a good brain for MMA, and interesting to see his perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to mention Elite XC. I mean, there's videos on YouTube you can see him where he's training with Frank Shamrock and Kimbo Slice. Actually, just recently, since that interview, you know, he's obviously trained with American Top Team. For those who follow us on Twitter, at SubmissionAUS, you can see a photo of him and Robbie Lawler. There was a picture of him and Kimbo Slice. So good times all around. But let's talk about UFC Fight Night McGregor vs. Siver, Fight Night 59, Fight Night Boston, whatever you want to call it. It was an interesting event. I wouldn't say it was the most craziest. It wasn't the most exciting. There were definitely exciting points, but I want to talk about a few things that happened. I want to start off talking about the Lorenz Larkin versus John Howard fight. Dennis, I know you've got a few opinions on this one. What was your thoughts?
Well, yeah, going into this one, I really sort of expected quite a bit from John Howard. Obviously, he was coming off a couple of losses, and, you know, Boston is really where he shines. Unfortunately for him, Lorenz Larkin was just on a completely other level in this fight. You know, he did cut weight. He dropped a weight class, and he looked spectacular. I mean, he didn't look drawn out or tired at all. He was light on his feet. He was flying around the octagon, putting together amazing combinations, really sort of in a class of his own. And for me, for me personally, it gets me very excited about Larkin in the division and his future. You know, he had a lot of promise when he was one division up, but, you know, obviously he had some roadblocks there. But now I'm very excited to see what he can do in this division. Perhaps it's the right one for him. Cass, when you saw John Howard fighting in Boston, did you think he was going to have the edge over Larkin, or did you predict that Larkin was going to beat him?
I honestly didn't know. I was very interested to see how this one would go. John Howard, you know, he's another guy who's been bouncing up and down between weight classes. Obviously, he spent some time in middleweight and then dropped down to welterweight, which I found really interesting because I remember not too long ago reading an interview with him where he said he had no power at welterweight. He was talking about how he used to kick people when he was, you know, at middleweight, leg kick people, and he felt like he could kick their legs right from under him. And then when he went down to welterweight, he just didn't have that same power. That was around the time, I believe, when he fought, it was just before he fought Uriah Hall, actually. And then to see him drop down to welterweight, I didn't really understand why. And I think it hasn't exactly worked out for him. You know, you see him getting knocked out. But again, he's a really tough guy. Lorenz Larkin, on the other hand, he's a guy that I've really enjoyed watching fighting. Another guy that obviously has been bouncing around. He used to be a light heavyweight in Strikeforce, dropped down to middleweight, and then has come all the way down to welterweight. That is definitely the division for him. No, he's looked absolutely fantastic, and for a long time now, you know, he's also looked he's looked a little bit pudgy. I really didn't understand why he was at middleweight. Really exciting striker. There's a lot of fights where I kind of wanted to see him win because I really wanted him to stick around in the UFC. And when he lost 3 in a row to Brad Tavares, Costa Philippou, and Derek Brunson, I kind of feared that this exciting guy might be leaving the UFC. But I'm really happy to see him at welterweight. And I'm really excited to see how he's going to do. You know, not exactly known for his grappling, but I love watching this guy strike.
Yeah, definitely some exciting times ahead for Larkin. And why not? You know, welterweight division, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening around there. So why not have another guy in there who might potentially in the future sort of challenge for the title? You know, someone else with a lot of hype behind him, you know, is Pendred. He's Cathal Pendred. You know, I always stuff up his first name, so I was trying to avoid saying it. But he versed Sean Spencer, and he's a guy with a lot of hype behind him, partly because, you know, he's got a whole country of MMA fans from Ireland behind him cheering him on. He didn't have the most impressive performance today. There was a bit of controversy with the scorecards even, wasn't there, Cass?
Yeah, I thought it was a bit ridiculous. Honestly, Cathal Pendred, he looked like he's got a good grappling base, obviously being a former rugby player. You know, I enjoyed seeing him grapple and wrestle, but this was definitely not his fight. It was an absolute ridiculous robbery. Possibly one of the few on this card, but I wasn't really impressed, to be honest. What were your thoughts on the fight, Dennis?
Yeah, it's just one of those things for Pendred where he came in with a lot of hype, and I don't know if that hype's affected him mentally or whether it's the fact that, maybe he just didn't realize the gaps that he has. But it was obvious from watching this fight that he really needs to focus in on his striking. And I mean, Joe Rogan said it over and over throughout the fight, and I think, after watching a replay of it, he'll know that he has to go back into the gym and really focus on it. Like you mentioned, rugby player, great grappler. It's very natural to the rugby players, to be great grapplers. It's a sport that goes hand in hand sometimes with wrestling, but striking is where he needs to improve if he really wants to make an impact on the division and hang in there with the big boys. Now, the decision, like you mentioned, Cass, a bit iffy, a bit sniffy, and Pendred was a bit lucky to walk away with that win there, but hopefully he learns something from this win and takes it a little bit like a loss even, comes back even stronger next time, because I have a feeling the UFC has big plans for him, and he'll be fighting higher and higher level competition in the future. I just don't think that his striking right now would be able to hang in there with some of the big boys in the division. So he really needs to tighten up that end of his game. Let's just say if Lorenz Larkin was standing across from him, it would be a very, very rough night for Pendred, the Pendred that we saw today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say the scorecards are a bit more than iffy. They were pretty ridiculous, and I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? Unequivocally, Cathal Pendred lost that fight. And I think it's interesting because we had John Kavanagh, Conor McGregor's coach, and obviously the head coach at Straight Blast Gym, where all the Irish guys these days train. And he's talking about how Conor McGregor trains with Cathal and how Cathal has great pressure and teaches him a lot, especially on the ground. I hope the Cathal, and I'm sure they're not, they're playing chess, but I hope Cathal can, learn some of Conor McGregor's striking and, maybe adapt that into his game, because, man, if, looking bad against Sean Spencer is one thing, but if you go to the top 10, even the top 15 in the welterweight division, Cahall's going to have a really tough time hanging in there with those guys.
Yeah, one of the things I worry about a little bit about that camp, and, I don't want to be negative about it too much, but I noticed it with Houlihan when he fought today as well against Shane Howell, I hope I pronounced his surname correctly, was the fact that, Houlihan had a pretty similar striking to Conor McGregor, and, it's a very interesting striking style. And what I hope is not that, not everybody in the camp tries to replicate his style, because, McGregor's style is very effective because he's such a great athlete. He's got such a good background with his kicks, but it's not really a style that works for everybody. And what I really hope is that Pendred picks up his own style. I don't want to see sort of mirrors of Conor McGregor coming out of the camp. I want to see everybody sort of focusing on their strengths and create their own game. And Houlihan looked a little bit like McGregor in the striking department, and it wasn't always very effective. So what I'd like to see those guys do is find what they're effective at and find their style. And I know how popular Conor McGregor is and how they're all trained together, but it'd be great to see them come up with some techniques that work better for them and sort of not focus so much at techniques that work well for McGregor. You know what I mean, Cass?
Oh, you know what? And that's a really, really good point you made, because, now that I think about it, if you look at Cathal Pendred and you obviously look at Conor McGregor, the way they're built, their frames are completely different. Them as fighters, obviously Cathal and Conor are completely different fighters. I just hope that in terms of, the fundamentals and things like that, Cathal can pick up enough, I guess, striking just to sort of implement his wrestling game, even if he just wants to use his strikes to set things up and set up takedowns. But again, the higher you go up in the division, great top control and great, pressure and being heavy on top, it's not always going to not only win you the fights, but I mean, you can still win fights and you can still be exiled from the UFC. Just take a look at two guys that did it probably better than anyone in Jake Shields and John Fitch.
Yeah, that's right. Pendred actually had a bit of a rough fight for his last fight, didn't he? I'm just trying to think back to it now. I think he was losing the fight and then he came back and won the fight, but it was pretty close. He was pretty close to being beaten in that fight as well. So it's been a couple of rough fights for Pendred. Interesting to see what kind of Pendred we see next. Because I guess the other thing for him is usually a guy like Pendred coming out of the Ultimate Fighter doesn't have as much pressure on his shoulders, or the pressure of a whole country on his shoulders, And I think a lot of people expect a lot of things from Pendred, and a lot of those guys coming out of McGregor's camp. So it kind of, I guess it's not that easy dealing with the pressure sometimes and sort of advancing your skills to the level that people expect them to be at. But very interested to see what kind of Pendred comes out next fight.
I want to talk about another controversial decision, which is Donald Cerrone and Benson Henderson. But before we get to that, I wanted to touch on this Uriah Hall and Ron Stallings fight. I want to get your thoughts, Dennis. Obviously the fight was stopped really early. It looked like he was just heating up, and then obviously you had that big cut on Ron Stallings. What did you think about this one, Dennis?
We just put the picture up, very recently on our Twitter, Submission AUS, at Submission AUS. Check it out, because you can actually almost see Stallings' bone through the cut. It didn't look that bad on TV, but it was pretty bad. And I know a few people said that if it was in Vegas, the fight might go on, but it was a pretty significant cut. So I'm not sure about the decision there. I think it could have been right. I was really, really impressed with Stallings, the way that he fought up until that happened. On pretty much a week's notice against a guy like Uriah Hall. I'm actually pretty excited to see what Stallings can do in his next fight with, adequate preparation. I know that he fought in Strikeforce before, but very interested to see what he can do in the UFC. What did you think, Cass? Did you think this was a case of Uriah Hall going out there and sort of cementing that he's getting better and that he's dangerous in the division? Or do you think that this proved anything for Uriah Hall, this win?
Well, I think Uriah Hall's a guy who needs to make really big statements in order to prove things. So here comes Ron Stallings on a week notice, and in all honesty, he looked really good. He looked very, very relaxed, and he looked good against a guy who, against a guy like Uriah Hall. And the thing is with Uriah Hall, he had such an impressive run on The Ultimate Fighter that is still etched in people's mind. That crazy spinning back heel kick, knockout. People still remember that, his crazy run, and ever since then, people have been questioning, can he replicate that run in the actual UFC in the middleweight division? You had Chael Sonnen say, you can beat everybody in that division, including who, saying that he could beat Anderson Silva. Thus far, he hasn't looked like a guy that can do that. He certainly didn't look bad in this fight. I honestly think it's too early to say. I think Uriah Hall, he's a guy that likes to hang back. He likes to counter-strike. I did see a lot of that in this fight. I think he was just getting going, and then the fight got stopped. I think it's really too early to say. He says he's going to put the beating on Costa Philippou. I think that's going to be a good test. And I'm really excited to see what Ron Stallings can do in this division, man. He was really exciting, and I can't wait for his next fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to agree with you. I don't know if it has done that much for Uriah Hall either. Just a couple of things in the fight with Uriah that sort of doesn't have me worried. But, he's very, I don't want to say he's flat-footed or he's telegraphing stuff too much. But I don't know. He's just sort of there in front of the fighters quite a bit. I know he's very good with his angles. He's very good with his head movement. But, when it comes to him fighting some of the upper echelon guys in the middleweight division, I'm not sure how his style is going to do against them. Now, I know that he's sort of finding himself still, and that punch that he got Ron with, it was almost like, I don't want to say it was accidental or anything, but it just sort of came out of nowhere, and it was, he's a gifted athlete. I think he's still trying to get an understanding of his body, of his mechanics, of his punches, and I'll be interested to see him against a real test. But in saying that, I'm happy that, Ron got up and took the fight on a week's notice against a guy like Uriah and, didn't make him miss a whole fight and do a fight camp for nothing. I mean, guys like Ron, they're pretty special in the business. So, yeah, agreed. Very excited to see what he does in the future.
Yeah, huge hats up. I think with Uriah Hall, his style is really, he loves to counter-strike and he loves to bait guys in. He loves to get guys to almost hit him and then he likes to counter. So I think with that punch, it wasn't so much an accident. It was just extremely risky because he kind of, he leaned back and then he came in, then he countered with that punch. It'll be very interesting how he does against, like you said, the top tier of the division. Guys like Lyoto Machida, guys like Luke Rockhold, and it'll be very interesting to see if he even gets to that part of the division. Now, I want to talk about this Donald Cerrone, Benson Henderson fight. A lot of controversy. Benson Henderson, I mean, you could pretty much take a photo of the announcement of the winner, and Benson Henderson's face pretty much said it all. Dennis, I want to get your thoughts. What did you think of the fight? Did you think Donald Cerrone won? And what did you think of Benson Henderson's performance?
it was one of those things where I definitely felt that Benson Henderson won. And I was very surprised that Donald Cerrone was announced the winner. Benson Henderson came out. He looked great. Joe Rogan was really pumping up some of the new techniques he was doing. He was doing that weird kick where he was throwing it across Cerrone's body and landing it on his back leg, which was really interesting to me because I'm guessing that would be pretty tough to do. He did look very, very good. And Cerrone looked pretty good as well. But I just think taking a fight so soon after fighting Jury was I think it was just too much for him. I don't think it's like you said, we were talking about this with a whole bunch of people and amongst ourselves as well. It's, you brought up a great point. How hard is it for an athlete to peak, so soon, after fighting? And Cerrone looked very, very flat in some parts of that fight. And a part of me almost thought, I sort of wish he didn't take this fight so soon because I want to see the best Cerrone against the best Benson Henderson, and losing against the guy 3 times, that would have been horrible for Cerrone. So on one side of the coin, Cerrone's very, very lucky that he got that decision because I think Benson Henderson won. And on the other side of the coin, if he would have lost that fight, I think it would have done a little bit of damage to his career because losing against the same guy 3 times in a row, probably not likely that he'd get a rematch with him anytime too soon. And obviously losing against Pettis the way that he lost against Pettis, and he's the champ, so it's going to take him a bit longer to get a title shot. Losing against Benson Henderson 3 times, that just would really sort of dent his hopes at getting a title shot anytime soon. So I was happy that this whole thing didn't bite him in the ass, but he really needs to be careful with taking fights so soon after he fights, just to be careful of not being so flat and being such a slow starter in a lot of his fights. I think he might be even a bit more susceptible to it as well. What did you think, Cass? What did you think when you first heard that he was fighting Benson Henderson, on such short notice? Did you think it was a good idea?
Look, I mean, I didn't really have much of an opinion. I kind of thought the only person who's going to know is going to be Donald Cerrone. I mean, we had Coach Wink on last week. He was pretty confident. And, I agree with what Coach Wink said, that if anyone could do it, Cerrone could. I mean, we saw Chris Lieben do it. He beat Aaron Simpson, then he beat Yoshihiro Akiyama. And the thing is, with Chris Lieben, when we spoke to him, he said that he went home and he was downing a pizza. I mean, I don't know what Cerrone was doing. Did he go out? Did he party? Did he, have 2 6-packs of Budweiser, or did he go back to the gym? I'm very interested in the way Donald Cerrone is because, don't get me wrong, I love how he's, happy to take any fight, anytime, things like that. But I mean, this guy's happy to take even fights at welterweight, which I find interesting because the guy going into this fight was on a 6-fight win streak, and he's happy to fight welterweights. And you got to think, even if he loses against a welterweight, that's still going to damage. I wouldn't say damage his reputation. I mean, the fans are going to love it and the UFC is going to love it. Great company man, but it's still, hey, you lost. You're no longer on a 6-fight win streak. He now has the longest active win streak in the UFC, 7 fights in a row. With this fight, though, do I think it was a complete robbery? When I first heard the announcement, when I saw that Donald Cerrone's name was announced, I was like, my God, this is Diego Sanchez, Ross Pearson all over again. I thought it was absolutely ridiculous. I went and rewatched. I got a chance to rewatch the fight. I put it on mute and I watched it. And it was actually a lot closer than many would think. If I had to give it to Cerrone, I would have given him the first round and the third round. But again, all those rounds were really, really close. One thing I noticed, and I'm not saying that Cerrone deserved the rounds because of it, but Cerrone was always pushing forward, always putting the pressure on Benson Henderson. Both guys, to be honest, they missed a lot. There was a lot of attacks that they threw. Benson Henderson basically caught him with a lot more clean kicks. Cerrone kind of boxed a lot more, and he didn't really hit him with a lot of clean punches. I think a lot of the time when Benson hit him, say, exiting the clinch and things like that, it didn't look very clean, and maybe some of the judges thought that, it didn't connect. All in all, it was a really, really close fight. Like, obviously Benson Henderson owned the leg kicks. Those 2 takedowns, I think, one was a takedown in the second. The one in the third wasn't really a takedown. I mean, he took his back and Benson popped up straight away. And even in the second, Donald Cerrone, even though he took him down, it was a nice takedown. I liked it. And taking Benson Henderson down, that's tough. He did absolutely 0 damage. I don't know if he even landed 1 strike, maybe 1, and that's being generous. So I still don't really see how you could give Donald Cerrone the second round. That one I thought was definitely for Benson Henderson. But in all, it just wasn't a good fight. I don't know whether Cowboy Cerrone was, too not beat up, but I don't know whether he just couldn't peak like he peaked for the Miles Jury fight. Benson Henderson, here's another guy though. Like, he didn't exactly have an excuse. I mean, I think he looked good in the fight, but yet again, it's another razor close decision, and that's not good for his career either. I don't think the UFC love Benson Henderson, and I'll tell you what, the fans definitely don't love Benson Henderson. I will give the guy a lot of credit after the fight. He gritted his teeth. He didn't say what he was really thinking, but I have to respect him because, his attitude about, not being upset and things like that, that takes a lot. It's like getting kicked in the balls and not even, showing anything on your face. So I have to say, I'm not a fan of Bible bashing. I do respect that about Benson Henderson, that he's, that's focus, that's motivation. But yeah, honestly, shit fight. That's pretty much that's my wrap up for that fight.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm a big fan of Benson Henderson, and I remember when he was champion, he was champion. I always sort of thought, yeah, he's pretty good in a lot of areas, and now he's on a back-to-back losing streak, 2 fights lost in a row,
first of his career.
And isn't that crazy how quickly that can happen to someone in the UFC? One of the things about Cerrone I wanted to ask you about, Cass, was, and when I was watching this fight, I watched it a little bit of it over again, and I think this might happen with Cerrone sometimes. He just didn't look very sure of himself in a lot of the fight. Like he didn't look very sure of his skills. A lot of parts of the fight, even like you mentioned when he took him down the first time, I wondered, because Cerrone, he's a beast on the ground, and I know he didn't want to get stuck on the ground with Henderson, but I would have loved just to see him try and do something. And I found that when he fought Miles Jury, he didn't have that sort of respect for Miles Jury that he did for Benson Henderson, and he sort of let loose and tried to do a lot more. And then when he fought, for example, a guy like Nate Diaz, I think he might have thought too highly of him and just didn't believe in himself enough. And I think that for me, that was another one of those fights where I thought he could do a lot more. And again, maybe it's because he fought so soon after his last fight, but then maybe it's again because, he lost to the guy twice. They're good friends. He really respects his skills. And I don't know, he just didn't look very sure of himself in the fight. He did well, but he just didn't look very sure of himself in certain parts.
Yeah, I think honestly with this fight, a lot of it came down to the mental side. There was a lot of factors going into this fight. I mean, obviously you had the quick turnaround for Cerrone, the fact that these guys were good friends, the fact that Cerrone lost twice to Benson Henderson. I mean, Cerrone had a huge... this is a huge gamble for him. I mean, quick turnaround. He put his streak on the line against the guy as dangerous as Benson Henderson. He didn't have a full camp training just for Benson. He lost to the guy twice. So part of me understands why Donald Cerrone would be, I guess, hesitant. And you never know how these last 2 weeks were. I mean, John Jones even said before the DC fight, he couldn't get warm, he couldn't get a good sweat going. You can make all the jokes you want about John Jones, but that's a serious thing. We've heard Frank Mir say it a lot. I think for a fighter to really get in the zone, it's a very important thing. Who knows? Maybe he did 3 rounds prior to this fight, and he didn't have much energy left. It definitely wasn't the Cowboy Cerrone that we're used to seeing. Although, to be fair, people do say Cowboy Cerrone chokes during the big fights. So in that sense, it kind of was. I think there was a lot of factors to this fight, but again, I'll say it again, it just wasn't a great fight. It wasn't the Cerrone we're used to seeing. I thought Benson Henderson looked good. I really can't fault him. I mean, he had those, side kicks to the leg. I think there was a lot of times where he shut down Donald Cerrone. Anytime Cerrone would come forward, Benson Henderson would get him with those leg kicks. But I guess the other thing I'll say, and with Benson, that's another thing. He's coming off a loss. He's coming off the first knockout of his career, going up against a striker who, on paper, you think would be a lot more dangerous than Rafael dos Anjos. So here's another guy that I can understand him, being a little bit cautious. And of course, there's the whole friend thing. So I don't know. I just think with Benson Henderson, I don't see him being champion of that division ever again, in my honest opinion.
Yeah, it's a tough one as well. And it'll be tough for him to get a title shot anytime too soon. How about this? Diego Sanchez versus Benson Henderson, like a fun fight, sort of bit of name value. What do you think? Would you watch that?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, I'd still be interested even in seeing Diego Sanchez versus Norma Park. I just want to see Diego Sanchez back in the octagon because he's a guy who, has been in there for so long, and you just never know how many fights he has, left in him. I'd be basically willing to see Diego Sanchez versus anyone.
Yeah, that's right. It'd be good to see him back. And, it's good. I heard that he got a couple of his cars back or something like that. Some people stole his cars. So always good to hear that as well. Now, Cass, the big main event. Before we jump to it, I got to say, I love jumping on YouTube. I love watching a few videos. It's a secret pleasure of mine, guilty pleasure. Sit there, open up a yogurt or whatever, tasty little snack and get in there. And, I always love, not always, but I love the job that UFC have been doing with the embeddeds lately.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the way they've shot him. Look, the Robbie Lawler one where he went pants shopping, that wasn't as interesting as it could be. But all the Conor McGregor ones for this one were very, very interesting to me to watch. It's great seeing the guy outside the octagon sort of carry on in his day-to-day activities, sort of try and get a gauge of what kind of person he is outside the octagon. And he seems like a really cool guy. Like, he seems like he's got a bit of ADD, he loves running around, having a bit of a laugh. Very, very respectful, a lot of laughs. But I really enjoyed the embedded series going into this one. I think the UFC are doing a really good job with it. Cass, are you a fan of embedded lately? Have you been enjoying it?
Yeah, for sure. I haven't been able to catch all of them. Sometimes leading up to the fights, I'll watch them here and there. Sometimes I'll watch like episode 1 and 2, and then I'll be too busy to watch 3, or I'll watch, 2 and 3 or whatever the case is. But I believe I watched all of them. How many were there for this one? 3 or 4?
5. That
5. Okay, so I didn't watch all of them. Okay, I watched maybe I watched 4. I don't even remember. It's been a crazy week. I know I watched at least 3 of them, and I liked what I saw. Like Conor McGregor, doing his thing at Reebok. I liked seeing Dennis Siver, doing his thing, and having his translator Nico. I remember meeting Dennis Siver back in UFC Sydney when he fought George Soteropoulos. And he seems like a really nice guy as well. I like the contrast between Dennis Siver signing autographs and Conor McGregor signing autographs. I thought that was very different of Conor McGregor. I think most of the guys in the UFC, they're all nice guys, happy to sign autographs, things like that. But Conor McGregor just took it to another level. These guys are obviously going to sell his autograph on eBay, and Conor McGregor was more than happy to help him with that. And you're talking about, you got to go get that money, and asking how much is his autograph worth and things like that. So he's a real people person. I mean, some people they're just born with it. Some people are, extroverts. Some people are introverts. I think Conor McGregor definitely an extrovert, loves the people, and I think that's one of the big things that's gotten him this way.
Yeah, very interested in watching Jose Aldo in one of the embeddeds. I don't know if you watched one of those ones because I think they were sort of later. Might have been at 4 or 5, but very interested to see him come down to America. And, from watching the footage that I saw, I don't think anyone's more excited to fight Conor McGregor than Jose Aldo because he was in the embedded. They got him to fly down from Brazil with his family just for this event. And he was talking about how, he better win. Like, I better have not come for nothing.
Yeah.
And, I can't wait to fight him and that kind of thing. I mean, I think Aldo realizes this is a huge opportunity for him. And, he was walking around and some Irish fans got some photos with him and he was all jokes, smiles. I mean, I haven't seen a Jose Aldo this happy in a long, long time. So he usually comes off a bit grumpy to me, but I don't know the guy. So, he was loving it. He was loving life. He was smiling, laughing, shaking everyone's hand, looking like he was really excited to see if Conor McGregor would win. So I was interested to see that aspect in the embedded.
Well, and it makes sense because Jose Aldo has been pretty vocal about how he's not happy with the pay that he's getting, the money that he's being, reimbursed. And obviously, if he gets a fight against Conor McGregor, that's going to be a huge payday. It's going to be bigger than Frankie Edgar, bigger than Chad Mendes. It's going to be a big one. Who knows when that fight's going to happen? I mean, we're in January now, so it's not like we're going to get that in Melbourne, unless you never know. That's obviously November, but you never know with the way rematches are these days. You just never know. Let's talk about the fight itself. Conor McGregor versus Dennis Siver. Did it play out how you thought, and what did you think of the fight, Dennis?
Well, and not just because his name is Dennis, but I've been walking around the streets and over down at the gym here in Melbourne, and I've been telling people, hey guys, don't just think Dennis Siver isn't going to come out and fight. For some reason, I had this feeling that Dennis Siver was going to go out there and ruin the UFC's plans, and I knew McGregor was probably going to beat him, but this little gut feeling that I had where I thought, Dennis Siver, he did it to George in Sydney. he's a bit sneaky sometimes. He's a tricky guy, and maybe he could get it done today. And boy, was I wrong about that. And Cass, I know you told me when we spoke, you didn't really give him much of a chance. Going into this one, after watching those embeddeds, those 3 embeddeds that you watched, did anything change in you? Did you think there was a chance that Siver was going to walk out with his hand raised and ruin the UFC's plans, or were you still pretty sure that McGregor was going to come out in this one?
Look, I'm not going to lie. I'm a human. I'm a person with emotions. When you see those embeddeds and, the way that the UFC edits them and everything, you do get that like, maybe he does have a chance this and that. But I was like, nah, get away from me, temptress. It's like watching the countdown. It's like watching the countdown when like they make both guys look so even. And then, you have that like moment of suspended disbelief. And then you're like, get out of here, witch. Stop trying to hypnotize me. Like, I know what's going to happen. Or not really. I mean, you saw in 2014, there was so many upsets. And of course, there's every chance. I mean, Conor McGregor is still on that path to prove himself. But I really thought that Conor McGregor was going to win this one. Just, for a lot of things. Obviously, he's a longer guy. The only thing that I was wondering about was how will Conor McGregor deal with the pressure? Because that's the thing. It's all well and good being an up-and-comer, and it's all well and good when everybody doubts you. But Conor McGregor's at that point now where people look at him and they go, okay, he is skilled, It's like those guys that come out and they knock people out because people doubt their knockout power or they doubt their striking, or same with guys like with submissions. And then people go, oh, shit, okay, that's his specialty. We need to look out for that. And then, they study tape on him and, start to neutralize those tools. So, man, super impressed by Conor McGregor in this fight. Was it perfect? No. I think one of the biggest look, you saw Dennis Siver take down Conor McGregor, and I don't know, people might say, what about when he versus Chad Mendes and Ricardo Lamas and things like that. For the record, I do believe those guys will be able to take Conor McGregor down. I don't think it's really anything to do with the fact that, what we saw with Dennis Siver, because let's be honest, Conor McGregor gave Dennis Siver absolutely no respect whatsoever. And obviously Dennis Siver is, predominantly a striker. So I don't think Conor McGregor was really expecting, for him to come out and get takedowns. And obviously Conor McGregor is confident enough that if he does get taken down by a guy like Siver, he can pop back up. Really, really impressive performance. And I know a lot of people are going to say, he got hit and this and that, and he got taken down. I just think it's purely because Conor McGregor, wanted to clown him, wanted to toy with him, wanted to have a bit of fun. And I'm glad the fight lasted, honestly, 2 rounds, because had it been a knockout in 2 minutes, yeah, it would have been super impressive, but I still think there would have been a lot of questions, and I don't think we would have seen as much, from Conor McGregor, enough to really sort of analyze and look at. And I'll be honest, skills aside, I haven't seen anyone that confident in the cage since Anderson Silva. It reminded me when Anderson Silva would get in the cage and just show absolutely zero respect and just stand in the cage and basically let them do whatever they wanted, whatever they thought that they could get away with, and then basically just clown them. So really exciting to see that. I mean, you haven't really seen that since Anderson Silva, since, vintage John Jones. So I'm very excited for this Jose Aldo fight. And then, of course, there was the jumping over the fence. Before we get to that, what was your thoughts on the fight, Dennis?
Well, I think this fight really solidified in my mind that this guy's a very, very special athlete. And not all just talk, but, he's got a substantial amount of skill. I was a bit hesitant jumping on the Conor McGregor bandwagon because I didn't really know whether or not he'd be able to back up some of the stuff that he said. But, the guy's clearly a very, very special guy. He's got this hidden charisma that sort of just takes effect on you when you watch him talk and do his stuff in the embeddeds and all the interviews. His fight style is exciting. And, the way that he fought today, I mean, he absolutely just, kicked the crap through Dennis Siver. I mean, his face in the post-fight press conference, like one of his eyes looked like it was almost, swollen shut. And, I mean, Dennis Siver has fought some really tough guys, and he's never really looked like he's been in a fight as much as he's looked like he's been in a fight with McGregor. And that was after 2 rounds. And, I mean, he was just, doing whatever he wanted to him eventually. So, this really makes me think a lot higher of Conor McGregor. I was very, very impressed with him. I think he's got a very special relationship with John Kavanagh. And I think their relationship is a big catalyst in his performances. I think his coach, John, just really understands him really, really well. And he's got the right team behind him. And he's just a very, very special person that We don't see very often in sports. And yeah, to me, I definitely think that now. And this fight and everything leading up to this fight, it really solidified it for me. And even before the fight happened, just watching the embeds and him doing interview after interview after interview and just putting in, performance after performance. The guy's just a professional in and out of the ring. I was very impressed with him. Very impressed with this performance.
It's interesting that you say professional in and out of the ring because after the fight, he obviously jumped out of the ring. And, you wouldn't exactly call it professional, but, I mean, I don't really care. It was extremely entertaining. He jumped over. He, looked over Jose. I didn't actually get what he was doing at first. Like, when he ran over, I thought, oh, yeah, he's going to celebrate with the Boston crowd. And I forgot, of course, Jose Aldo's in the crowd. So it was awesome to see him there, getting in Jose's face. Did you notice, Dennis? I saw it when I watched the replay. Did you notice the little girl jumping in front of Jose Aldo? I don't know whether it was his daughter or I don't know. Maybe Jose Aldo's wife is really short. I think it was a little girl, but it was crazy. This little girl was like ready to go. She jumped in there. It was insane, but. It's awesome because this is the kind of thing that, it's one thing to have a brawl in a press conference. That's really terrible PR, obviously. I loved it. I loved every second of it. But, that's one where you kind of got to patch things up. Here, it's not quite as bad. So it's awesome. Like, that the UFC are going to use that in the video for the hype for whenever that Jose Aldo Conor McGregor fight happens. So I'm already pumped, and it hasn't even been announced.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And I think that's why Conor's, such a big star. Because I think, in the back of his head, he wanted to, do something crazy after his fight, and that's what he did. Someone needs to get that little girl a burgundy jacket. She can be like Ron Burgundy, the guy that stands in the corner with a mustache that looks like Ron Burgundy.
Yeah.
I think they need to get her in. A lot of the times, this is completely unrelated. I don't know about you, but does the security that takes the fighters out to the ring sometimes annoy you? Because sometimes they annoy me. Like, they get in the way of the walkout. They're all like, oh, no, keep moving. The guy just wants to stop and do something. They're all like, oh, no, keep moving. Oh, you got to be here. It's like, who are you guys? Get out of the way. Get out of the way of the show.
Yeah, security always does my head in. You know what?
Old sheriff that has no idea where he is.
Yeah.
Oh, it tells his wife, oh, yeah, I'm just going to go off and work some little fight around the corner. Well, it comes out as all like trying to be cool and be a sheriff. It's like, dude, we're not here to see you. It reminds me of like back in the day when like there used to be like referees in professional wrestling. Some of them had their own walkout music and stuff. It was unnecessary.
Well, you know what reminded me of actually professional wrestling? When Dennis Siver came out and he looked like he got lost on his way to the arena. And it reminded me of Chris Jericho when he was walking out and he got lost and he couldn't find the entrance. I was like, man, what's going on? Like, I've never been to Boston, but like, is it just labyrinth after labyrinth? Like, how did Dennis Siver not find his way out? I thought that was really funny, but yeah, no, seriously, I can't wait for this Jose Aldo Conor McGregor fight. And you know what? A lot of people have their opinions. A lot of people say Frankie should have gotten the fight. I was looking at everybody's records before, and it really is only Frankie and Conor McGregor. Those would be the only two choices. I think you got to remember, Frankie already had his shot and he lost. And man, come on, who doesn't want to see Conor McGregor and Jose Aldo fight? That is by far the much more excitable fight as opposed to Frankie Edgar, Jose Aldo too. I want that rematch to happen eventually, and that's going to be really an exciting fight. Who knows? Maybe we'll see Conor McGregor versus Frankie Edgar, but right now that's the fight to make. That's the one that everybody's excited for. So I absolutely do think Conor McGregor deserves the next title shot.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to someone about Frankie Edgar, and then he did some commentating today, and I thought about it, and I thought, wait a minute, this could actually be really good for Frankie Edgar because, I mean, all right, I don't think Conor McGregor could beat Jose Aldo. I think Aldo's going to go through him, but if for some reason McGregor does beat him and Frankie Edgar gets to fight him for the title, in his head he's thinking, hey, I'd rather fight this guy for the title than have to fight Aldo again.
Yeah.
It's an easier fight. How much money will I draw doing it? Who knows? Maybe we can do like a rematch down the road with him. And yeah, I think there's a part of him that's sort of seeing some benefits to letting McGregor sort of go in front of him in the deli queue, get his ham, and then he can get in there and get the ham and the prosciutto, if you know what I mean, because I don't know what I'm talking about. But the fact of the matter is, I think he's seeing that if McGregor does beat Aldo, there's a good opportunity for him to fight McGregor, beat McGregor, become a champion again, and it's an easier fight than fighting Aldo for him. So perhaps that side of him is sort of swaying him a little bit and making it a little bit easier with the fact that McGregor's going to be fighting Aldo. The other thing is they're not fighting in Ireland. They're going to be fighting in Vegas.
Oh, so that's confirmed.
Yeah, how about them apples?
That's interesting. Well, I did hear that it was either going to happen in Ireland or in Vegas. Did they say why? Did they say why they chose Vegas?
Yeah, Dana spoke about it in the post-fight press conference. And basically what he said was, he said some interesting stuff. And again, one of the reporters sort of didn't call him out on it, but wanted more details on it. He said, number one, when they do a pay-per-view in a foreign country, they lose about 20 or 30% of the buys for some reason. Don't know why. And then number two, he said it's because the media in America don't cover it as much. And number two, he said a show the size of the stadium in Ireland, the one that holds 93,000 people in it, would cost them a lot of money to set up. They'd have to figure out something to set up over the octagon because of the rain. Again, he said the pay-per-views might go down. And then somebody said, well, getting 93,000 people, wouldn't that balance out some of the money that you guys would lose through pay-per-view? And he said something really interesting that blew my mind. He said they actually would make more money on the gate in Vegas than they would in Ireland because he said the production costs that would go into doing Ireland would be so high that they would actually make a lot less money than if they just did a Vegas show. Isn't that interesting?
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And that's something that never gets talked about, Like, I don't want to get into the whole fighter pay and this and that. But, production costs, no one really knows what it costs unless you're in the business or unless you've spoken to, guys and, like, I don't know, Dana White or production truck guys or something. No one really knows. And I've always been curious, how much does that cost? I don't think Fox cover it at all. I don't think anyone covers it. I think the UFC completely cover it themselves. So I think that's another thing that people often forget. And it makes sense. 93,000 people. I mean, Jesus. To hire out that stadium will be one thing. And then, of course, all that they build, crazy contraptions and stuff like that, like you said, to cover the rain. So interesting, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's like the big screens, and then the buffet in the back for the fighters,
for the media like us.
Be substantial. That's right. Some canapes, some drinks.
Again with the canapes.
It's just all right. They're going to be doing an event in Melbourne, and I'm expecting canapes, but I don't want to get into it too much. But I'm chasing the canapes. But that got me actually thinking about the event in Melbourne, the one at the Etihad Stadium with potentially 56,000 people. How much is that going to cost them? Because that's going to be a pretty penny as well. Big screen. It's probably going to be a buffet table there as well.
Hopefully some canapes. There's got to be a canape budget.
Dude, if there's no canape budget, then they definitely need to get us on the financial team in the UFC.
Then it's officially a flop. It doesn't matter whether we see John Jones versus like Brock Lesnar. If there's no canapes, it's officially a flop pay-per-view. No, you know what? That's an interesting one. I don't know. I know that obviously Australia is a proven market. Dana White said that we're about top 4. I don't know with Ireland. That's the thing.
We're in the mix. Australia's in the mix. We're like the Frankie Edgar of countries. Like we're almost up the top. We're not quite there.
We're in the mix. He won't say exactly where we are. We're just in the mix. Yeah, I don't know, but we're a proven market. I don't know what the deal is with Ireland. Like, I'm not 100% sure what the population is of Ireland.
I think it's 93,000 people. So literally everybody will have to go to the stadium that lives in the country. No, I'm kidding. There's a lot of people that live there. It's a great place. My uncle's Irish.
No, he's not.
David Casper, I'm trying to balance it out because I know it's going to be Irish people on our YouTube page going, that Dennis, he can't pronounce Pendred's name. And also, there's more than 93,000 people that live in Ireland. Yeah, I know there is, guys. I'm just kidding. Yeah, but we'd love to be over there. Fly us over there, please.
People in Ireland know everybody, so they're going to be like, are you Dennis's uncle? No. Well, then he's lying.
So yeah, they'd catch him out.
I just checked. There's like 5 million people there in the Republic of Ireland, right?
That's heaps.
By contrast, New Zealand have 4.4. Yeah, well, here in Australia, we've got what, like 21, 22. I know we were 20 like years ago. So we've probably got like 21, 22 million now. So I don't know. Maybe like if you take a 56,000 seater stadium, and then you have a possibility of, hey, a percentage of those 20 million people are going to come down. Maybe we're the more proven market. I don't know. That's going to be
and they were talking about actually blocking off some seats, just making it available to 30,000 people.
That could work. Or they
It's
could make it like 100 people
it's like
and just make it really intimate.
Dude, it's like an intimate night with TJ Dillashaw where he defends his title and he's like drinking whiskey when he comes out. Now, that would be awesome. Speaking of whiskey, I don't know if you watched the post-fight press conference, but Conor McGregor was drinking whiskey that he claimed was from a bottle that costs $20,000.
Wow. Who gave it to him? Was this like, here, Conor, you have it because you're like the son of Ireland, or did he buy it? You know, what's the deal?
Well, I don't know, and nobody's confirmed this for me.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that the UFC are paying off fighters in liquor now. So it's instead of getting $80,000 to show up, you get 2 bottles and some stuff like that. So.
Tell you what, the fighters in Australia are going to be pretty disappointed when they, get the knockout of the night and they get like a case of VB.
Dude, yeah, no, the VB, the VB wouldn't fly. At least make a Carlton. But I was gonna say, there should be a keg in the back of Etihad Stadium. It would only be right.
What do you mean, like for the fighters or for the fans?
For everybody, there should be a communal keg. Communal keg that Joe Rogan interviews people from.
I think first of all, I think we should be the ones doing the interviews. Secondly, I think you're underestimating just how borderline alcoholics Australia are. And I mean that in the most like complimentary way.
We're just making enemies of every country in this episode.
That keg,
Irish people are going to start commenting on our videos. The Aussies are going to be like, "Oh, mate, what are you talking about?" We're just beautiful today. We're just great.
Tell you what, there'd be like one Aussie guy that would pick up that keg and down it himself, and that would be the end of the communal keg, and that would be the end of the interviews.
What I'm thinking is, you and me would actually be terrible financial people in the UFC. I'd come in and I'd bring in canapes. You'd bring in the keg, a communal keg, which they would have to build stuff for that, like a communal drinking tap, and then they'll be like, oh, what about like Anderson Silva fighting Nick Diaz? We'll be like, oh, well, there's not enough budget for that, but we've got canapes, guys, and we'll have to we'd
be like Eric Cartman. We'd be like, have you tried the canapes? They'd be like, what about the big screen? We'd be like, Dennis, you got a TV? It's like, well, I do. Boom, next problem.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that's enough for 1 week. I think that's enough for 1 month. No, but seriously, we'll be back next week. Another show, less rambling or more, depending on what you say in the comments. Hopefully you enjoyed it, guys. Big thank you to our guest. Big thank you to Pat Miletich, absolute legend, officially Hall of Famer in the UFC, and of course Bill Goldberg, a legend in our hearts and a legend in any wrestling fan's heart. Huge thank you to those guys for coming on the show, and we'll have some more big guests next week. Dennis, any final parting words for the fans?
Yeah, Rampage Jackson is fighting Fabio Maldonado. So I guess we'll see how many punches the guy can take in the next fight.
There you go. Interesting stuff. Tell us what you thought about UFC Fight Night Boston, and tell us what you think about this Rampage Fabio Maldonado fight. Till then, we'll catch you next week.